And welcome all. Jody, you've got your hand up and you're muted. What would you like to say?
What I like to say?
Yes.
Oh, good evening. How are you?
Feeling good. How are you?
Good. I'm great. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Just sitting here singing away. Am I late?
No, you're perfect. What kind of song? What are we talking?
Oh, it's a Paul Revere and the Raiders. I'm ancient.
Okay, that sounds good.
Kick.
All right. That country music?
Oh. No, they used to be on the Dave Clark 5 TV show during the week.
Sounds good.
No, okay. Enough silliness.
We need a little bit.
Okay.
So, welcome all. Do we have quorum? Let's see if I got it. Fantastic. We're doing great. Much lighter agenda. I think we're getting out of here before midnight. It's going to be great. Any thoughts about moving Lyman to the consent agenda? That seemed like a possibility.
That would be perfectly all right with me. The only question I've got about that is, what does the public think? Are there people that may be wanting to speak to the Lyman piece? And if we move it to the consent agenda, do we negatively impact them?
Well, that item is not for public hearing, so anyone who would want to speak on that would speak during matters from the public. And you all would be moving that to consent, which comes right after that matters from the public. So if there's something that comes to light, you could always move it somewhere else again.
Well, with that, I'm very happy to move it to the consent agenda.
I agree.
It gives us 30 minutes back.
Wonderful. Mr. Mitchell, would you be willing to make that motion?
Do we need to do that now, or do we do that in the meeting?
In the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if I forget, just remind me.
It will come up for sure. Other questions about the agenda? We've only got two things. Mr. Bob, please.
Hi. I guess I wanted to comment on the Lyman thing. It is a project by my office, for Kurt and Bruce, who are my employers. So for that portion, I might abstain, I guess. Is that the best way to just, I guess, on the whole consent agenda, possibly? To avoid any conflict?
Yeah, I mean, that seems, yeah. You can recuse yourself. Ms. Robertson's gonna echo that, I think.
Yes, I think recuse is the correct word. And then to the extent there's any discussion of that matter, I would just tend to recommend that you turn your camera off during the discussion and then come back in full view after that item is over.
Sure. Would it be reasonable to note that briefly when we're discussing the consent agenda?
That would be good, yes.
Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Other items? I'm reminding myself what the other items are. Grove Street is the big one. And then JPA.
Oh.
I had a question on, I guess not an agenda question, but more of a procedure question on the JPA. Are we asked for comments or dialogue on like a specific planning commission capacity or entrance review board or both?
Oh, interesting. Ms. Creasy, can you speak to that?
Sure. Sure. This is it's a preliminary discussion. It's an opportunity for the applicant to introduce the project. Typically, also, there are questions that the applicant has proposed that they would like to get some feedback from the commission on. I know Mr. Alfley has outlined a couple of questions in the staff report for considerations for the discussion. And so there's no action that comes out of this. This is just the opportunity for introduction at this point.
In past experience, it can be productive. Little things can pop up that can become big things. It's a good exercise.
Can we
Other
talk
questions?
a little, just on that same vein? So are we putting on our planning commission hat or entrance corridor hat? And at what point, does that matter in the review?
Are we talking about for JPA?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of, it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, right? I mean, some of the elements of entrance corridor guidelines, you might look at this project differently than if you were looking at it from zoning. So
I actually think they're looking for guidance on both.
Mhm. Yes, I mean, because both would apply and you all would hear both items, it's not a bad idea to share from both perspectives.
okay, thanks.
They may ask for some, and that may help them ask in asking for clarity on how the two issues come together or don't come together, which can happen. So that's a really good point, Ms. Russell. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anything on growth? This is an item we've kind of talked about, I think, twice before. It's okay if we already know everything.
I guess this is more of a, I can ask this again later. It's my first time, I guess, on Grove. But I was wondering what the neighborhood comments were generally, if there's a main theme. I know traffic is one.
That's it.
And Commissioner, I'll go, when I give my presentation, I'll give a recap of the last Planning Commission meeting. That's kind of also in the staff report about what was discussed, what speakers we had during that public hearing.
Thank you.
How do we know what's underneath all that kudzu? There could be
More kudzu.
The site is notable for its kudzu. It's lush.
It's a crop.
Now,
Anything
from the staff report, and maybe just want to talk a little more in the meeting, the concerns about the detail for affordability and quantifying it and tracking it. Do you think we can get at answers at a resolution?
So, Commissioner, our community solutions representative will be here, Alex Ukafuna. He can talk about that. I know the applicant is working on some resolutions that can be brought up kind of more in a public setting because the information they have been passing back and forth came too late to be included in the packet. So I didn't want that. I wanted them to talk about that in a public setting and not just be in the background. So they definitely can speak to what they're willing to address from the staff report.
Great, thanks.
Can we have your thoughts on that at the appropriate time?
I don't know if Alex is in the meeting yet. Missy, he was, I know.
Don't see him yet.
Brenda was unable to make the meeting.
See,
Oh, he's there.
Oh, no, I had it reversed. I'm sorry. I must have had it reversed. Brenda and Alex isn't at the meeting. I apologize for that.
No, that's okay. Originally Alex was, and then he had a conflict. So I am now the person here.
Will you be willing to speak to the new information we received tonight?
Yes.
Thank you very much. That's everything I've got. Do we want to take a few minutes off, relax, kick our feet up?
Sing.
Yeah, we
I
could be
could go
singing.
over. I could just note a few logistical things
Please.
as we move forward. It won't take very long. Just a second. I just wanted to point out that for our public hearing this evening, there are three potential actions that need to occur. And so we have them combined into one presentation because it is a full application altogether. But there are three actions that would need to happen, and they need to happen in the order that they're noted in the report, meaning the rezoning, critical slopes, and then the site plan. And there are recommended and alternative motions for each of those located in the staff reports. So that's just kind of a logistical reminder.
I do have a question about that. Is the thought from staff that we should approve some of these and not the rest?
Well, the thought from staff is you're making a recommendation. So if city council could enact really, they could enact the rezoning, but not the SUP of the critical slope. So you want to have an opportunity to provide input on each action.
Yes, Mr. Russell, you have that correct. It was rezoning SUP because you can't do the SUP without the rezoning and then the critical slope. I had in my brain another application. We have a lot of things going on. Thank you for that. But no, you're right. And like Mr. Offley said, that you all provide the recommendation, council could choose something different than the recommendation. So there are conditions that are listed for consideration in the reports, and those will we'll walk you through those as part of the meeting.
So one possibility would be to recommend against it, but if it proceeds, then with these
with these with specific things to share with council. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, that's helpful. Well, shall we take some time off? Anyone got any last questions? See you at 5:30. Thank you. And welcome to the Charlottesville Planning Commission regular meeting. Do we have Planning Commission quorum? Looking at faces.
Yes,
I see
sir.
faces. Thank you. Moving to the first item, matters to be presented by the public, not on the formal agenda. I believe you'd call this public comment. So this, as I understand it, basically anything except for the item we're considering on Grove Street. Yes, anything besides Grove Street.
You, Chair, and at this time, if you'd like to address members of the Planning Commission, please click your raise hand icon, or if you're joining us by phone, press *9. We'll call on you in the order of hands raised, and you'll have 3 minutes for comment. Chair, I see no hands raised.
Sure. It might be worth mentioning that this includes the Grove Street PUD, which is different from our other Grove Street thing. I don't know if anyone wants to speak on that, but
Does that change anyone's opinion? All right, I think we're at last call here. The matter of the consent agenda. Mr. Mitchell, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yes, I'd like to move that we move Lyman Street to the consent agenda. And with that, I move that we approve the consent agenda to include Lyman Street.
Second.
Mr. Habab, did you have a comment on this topic?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have to recuse myself from the Lyman Street item because it is related to my work here at BRW Architects.
That being the case, it may be wise to do roll. Ms. Creasy, would you take roll?
Sure. All right. Mr. Lahindra,
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Mr. Stolensberg,
aye.
Ms. Russell,
Aye.
and Mr. Solly Yates.
Aye. I believe that concludes the items on our regular meeting. Any further business to discuss before our joint meeting with council begins at 6 p.m.? Hearing none, I suggest we take a recess until 6 p.m.
I can go back to singing.
See you at 6. Thank you.
But you got it on mute so we can hear you.
The girl from Ipanema goes walking. I believe we are at 6 p.m. Planning Commission meeting resuming, now joined by City Council. Is City Council in order?
Chair, I'm seeing who's here.
Yes, we are. We've got at least 3.
Okay. Then we
This
are
is
in order.
perfect. Thank you. Then I believe we are ready for a public hearing about, shifting my notes. Here we go. 1613 Grove Street, ZM 20-000. Yeah. Mr. Offley, can you help us with this?
Certainly, Chair.
Thank you very much.
So, Commissioners, tonight you'll be holding a public hearing for a proposed rezoning and special use permit for 1613 Grove Street and deliberating a request for a critical slope waiver. You will hear all 3 applications in one presentation, but you will need to make 3 separate recommendations to City Council. On May 11, 2001, Planning Commission held a public hearing for the requested rezoning and SUP applications. The application was seeking to rezone the subject property from R2 residential to R3 residential and increase the density to 43 dwelling units per acre. The applicant was also seeking a recommendation on a critical slope waiver at that meeting. All 3 applications were needed for the proposed development. That development included 4 apartment buildings with 7 2-bedroom units per building for a total number of 28 residential units. During the public hearing, the Planning Commission heard from 5 members of the public. 2 members of the public voiced support for the proposed development and 3 voiced opposition. Public in favor of the development stated the city's continued need for affordable housing. Members of the public opposed to the development believe parking will be an issue on Valley Road Extended and the road cannot handle increased traffic. They also stated the development would not fit the character of the surrounding single and 2-family homes. During the Planning Commission's discussion, traffic, density, stream restoration, and impacts to the surrounding neighborhood were discussed. Planning Commission did not know if the location at the end of a dead-end street was the best location for a 28-unit apartment. Some commissioners would like to see more than the by right density, but less than 28. Traffic was the biggest concern as Valley Road is a narrow road and would be hard to improve due to Rock Creek running on one side. The commission also stated they would like to see more affordable units within the development. The proposal at the time only required 1 affordable unit per section 3412. At the end of the discussion, the applicant requested and was granted a deferral to address some of these concerns. The information before you tonight is pretty much the same. The critical slope waiver request has not changed at all. The information is the same as what was presented prior. The rezoning application, the applicant has provided an additional proffer in addition to the existing proffers. And the new proffer is related to affordable housing. The applicant updated the proffer statement to add an affordable housing requirement. The applicant is proposing that 8 of the 28 units will be affordable units. Of the 8 affordable units, 4 will be for rent affordable, where the monthly cost of rent, including any tenant paid utilities, does not exceed 125% of the fair market rate by unit bedroom for the Charlottesville MSA. And 4 units will be for rent units where the monthly cost of rent, including any tenant paid utilities, does not exceed the fair market rate by unit bedrooms for the Charlottesville MSA. The affordable units shall be reserved as such throughout a period to last 10 years from the date on which the units receive a certificate of occupancy. The special use application. This application has changed in that the original building height was a maximum allowed of 45 feet and a proposed height of 40 feet. The updated plan calls for a maximum allowable height of 45 feet and a proposed height of 35 feet. The applicant is proposing to lower the rear of the building so that each unit has 1 below grade apartment. The original development called for 28 2-bedroom units. The updated plan calls for 8 one-bedroom units and 20 two-bedroom units. Parking. The original development called for on-street parking on Valley Road Extended. The updated plan removes the on-street on-street parking. With the original plan that you saw, originally the development was required 1 affordable unit per 3412. The updated plan has been reconfigured that it is now below the 1 FAR that would require an affordable unit, but the applicant is proffering the 8 affordable units as mentioned prior. The applicant representative, Justin Schimpf with Schimpf Engineering, is here and will provide a brief presentation, and then both the applicant and staff will be available to answer questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Schimpf.
Good evening, everyone. Justin Schimpf with Schimpf Engineering. A quick sound check. Everyone hear me okay? Very good, thank you. I have a presentation. If we could get that pulled up, I'll go through our changes briefly and give a summary of how we see the project here. Starting with the location, I think for all but one member here, this is the 3rd time perhaps we've seen this, the 4th time now, but it's at the end of Valley Road Extended, and it's an undeveloped site, basically kudzu forest. Nothing particularly redeeming about it from a landscape perspective. They are long, platted, and undeveloped lots that Rock Creek runs between them and the road. And if I could get to the next page, please, I'll go to mine. So our concept, just to remind everyone, there are 4 buildings proposed and a parking lot in between. The buildings, you'll see this pink area in the middle between the 2 buildings actually represents a covered kind of patio area. This is not structure, so it's 1 structure, 2 structures, 3 structures, 4 structures. The footprint of these structures is around 2,100 square feet a piece. So this design itself, the layout, has not changed. We have revised the grading a bit based on some of the feedback we heard last time, just to help fit these buildings into the terrain a little better. If that was possible, the suggestion made, I think it was a good one. So next slide, please. We'll go over the specifics here. So the summary of changes are, as was noted by the staff, 28% of the units, so 8 out of the 28 are now proposed as affordable units. Our clients were listening in last time and heard the concerns in the council. They know what issue it is in the community, and so they've looked at this and feel comfortable proposing this. It's a fairly substantial offer of affordable housing for a project this small. We have changed the bedroom counts, still 28 units, but gone to 8 one-bedroom units. The thought is most of them will be the affordables. That effectively dropped the floor height of the 2 buildings at the front, these 2, down 1 story. So just smaller structures, basically. We also adjusted the grade at the back of the site. There was a large retaining wall along here, and we eliminated that particular site retaining wall. So in detail, next slide, please. Affordable housing, you heard. So 4 units at the 125% HUD FMR rate, and then the other 4 units, 14% at the HUD FMRs. Of the units, they're broken up, half being for household incomes of less than 65, half less than 80 in there, trying to hit both sort of the more affordable and the middle for the workforce, which is what a building like this is designed for in many ways to begin with. The initial thought of this property owners was this would be more of a student type situation. We were looking at 4-bedroom units in original design, and we really pivoted something that's really more focused on what those who are working and living in the community would need. I'll just touch on the affordable housing proper. There was a comment kind of, oh, we didn't have the information clear, or didn't have everything complete on the proper language. Some of that I think is related to confusion about how we had submitted it. We had submitted a proper statement and this covenant, which effectively is a recorded agreement that would act like the city's standard operating procedure. One of the problems with the affordable housing is that you really dive into it, and it's been talked about many times here. If we just said, hey, we'll give you 8 affordable units with nothing else said, it leaves way too much to the imagination when you go to actually enforce those rules. So part of the reason this has been a number of months since we have been back was we worked with the city attorney's office, and they developed a template, if you will, for this that we work from, which includes a proffer, which outlines the high level, hey, we need to do this, this, and this. And then we're going to do it in these very detailed ways with this covenant. And the benefit of that is that if the proffer statement covered every single item relative to the affordable housing, it would be 14 pages long. And if we ever made a mistake or anything, we'd have to come back to city council to amend that. So I think the suggestion was appropriate from the attorney's office. And to our mind, that the changes we're talking about are not substantive. We're not disagreeing that we're going to provide all the affordable units as we described. It's really just a matter of cleaning up some of the language or clarifying things in this covenant, which we every confidence we can do working with the city attorney and those staff members moving forward. So we don't consider that really an issue, but we're happy to answer questions about that in more detail after our presentation. If I go next slide, please. Other details. This is the sort of building change. So you'll notice the building on the right is the original building concept, which has a 4th floor with bedrooms in the top. We've sunken the building down now and brought the grade up from the perimeter so that we can achieve the 35-foot building height in the R2 code. So basically our proposal now falls within the thresholds of the current zoning. We're not asking for an expansion in building height or footprint or anything of that nature. The front building on the left, this is the one that we've dropped a floor from. This is now just 1, 2, 3 floors, 35 feet tall, max height again. Very same footprint as the buildings, but just 1 story short. That was in response to some of the comments about the massing of the building that came up at the last meeting. We think this is a reasonable approach to the site and does get the building height more consistent with what's allowed in the neighboring areas. As we talked about, this site does sit down substantially from what's behind it. So these building heights were really not sticking up or tucked in the corner. We don't think that from a massing standpoint, this is going to really stand out, particularly because of the topography it sits within. Next slide, please. This is just a little summary of where we've made the change that I went over earlier. Again, floor removed from the front buildings, retaining walls, we got down to 4 or 6 feet instead of 15 feet. So we've worked with the site a little better to make that just a little better grading design and sort of limit the size and mass of the buildings. And then next slide. Interesting comparison in all these things, and I'll talk about this a little more in my closing remark, is, there are quite a few larger structures built around town. None of them small apartment buildings because the zone doesn't allow it anywhere, essentially. It's very difficult. So what we have, we looked in 3 years, there were 20 homes over 3,000 square foot finished space. These are the ones we found as online records, so probably more. Our buildings are 2,100 square foot in footprint. So at 3 and 4 stories, because of the roof construction, we're also losing square footage for parking underneath. We're like 5,000 to 6,000 square foot of finished space. So yes, these are larger structures, but they are not entirely out of character with single family homes that are being built all around the city. And I'm sure there's many large homes, larger than, are equivalent to 5,000 or 6,000 square foot single family homes throughout the city. Maybe not in the street, but certainly it's not an impossible thing. So we have worked hard to get these things at a scale we think is appropriate, but also providing a density that's, we think, healthy. The key thing to think about, if you were talking about just 4 single family lots, that's 4 households. Our structures provide housing for 7 households, 2 of those affordable and 5 market rate in every structure. There's a big benefit in how many people are housed and then what the sort of income of those folks are in this product versus the single family and the duplex zoning that's the predominant construction types. Next slide, please. Just quickly, we've kept the same stream buffer restoration and the $48,000 sidewalk proffer. That's the same, it hasn't changed, but we still are offering those things. And then last slide. So in summary, I'll leave you with our cross section of these 2 structures here. I do lots of projects in all sorts of places, and I can tell you I have never once prepared a development project that didn't impact somebody somehow, whether it was by right, whether it was rezoning, whether it was we'll do everything from a 20-acre estate out in the rural area where somebody clears 20 acres of trees for one house. That's an impact. An office building downtown draws more traffic into downtown. The pedestrians who are walking have to deal with that traffic, right? Parking is an issue for folks with that. There's more traffic congestion, or that's a by right office building. We've done a big apartment complexes. It did one in Old Trail, a 200+ unit development there. Yes, add some more traffic. In this case, that's I think our primary impact here. So if you crunch the numbers and look at, let's say, the duplex by right plan, there's around 10 trips in a peak hour in the evening. Our plan with these 28 units smaller comes out to 19 peak hour trips. So it's 9 trips in an hour. So it works out to be an increase of 1 trip every 6 minutes throughout that hour on average. Cars may come a little close together here and there, but that's our impact. And I won't say that's not an impact, but I will say it's not much. The benefit of this project is 10 years affordable rental. It's a subsidy of about $260,000 developers offering. So somebody is receiving the benefit of that. 8 units are voucher eligible in this project during that whole period of time because of the affordability levels. We have $48,000 in sidewalk improvement money. And I will concede that may not, not going to build a sidewalk all the way down the street, but the money will be used somewhere in the neighborhood. And if that's improving handicap ramps or crosswalks, somebody's getting the benefit of that money, somebody in the public. And so if I look at this on a totality, it feels very much to me that the sum of the benefits far outweigh the impacts. And I understand the staff's recommendation is based upon, yes, the map is orange, 21 units an acre. We're over that, right? We have these maps, we have these plans that tell us what we should do. But at the end of the day, zoning is really about the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And that has been used often to say, oh, well, the public is like those, right around, the people on the street, how we protect their health, safety, and welfare. But really, it's about everybody. It's about the community. And so when we look at this, just from an overall standpoint of what's the purpose of zoning, why are we looking at this, why are these projects, is this an overall net benefit to the public? And to me, it's a no-brainer. It is. There'll be impacts on the street. I won't deny that. But the benefits to me far outweigh those. And that's why we bring these kind of projects forward. And we'll keep doing that because I think it's necessary. And we hope you support this project in front of you. So hope that covers everything you were thinking questions-wise. But I'm happy to answer more if the commission has any further questions.
Any questions? I can take note. Yeah, okay, Mr. Schulzenberg.
Sure. Mr. Schimpf, you said that each unit would have 2 affordable homes, each building would have 2 units that were affordable in them. I noted that in your proffer, it did not say anything about the distribution of units, which is something that their standard operating procedures typically call for affordable units to be distributed throughout the development in a way that's doesn't crowd them together. And that was noted in the staff report. Was that just an example of 2 units, or there will be 8 units and there will be 4 buildings, or will there actually be 2 units in each building?
The plan was actually to do all the 1-bedrooms affordable, because what we have gathered is that's actually the greatest need, because those are often like single households who may have vouchers, but don't have necessarily a roommate to help with rent, right? So that's what we had thought of. I don't think we're opposed to otherwise, but I use that as an example to say, hey, a single family house is being replaced effectively with 2 affordable plus 5 units to really kind of compare what we traditionally build versus what could be built. But our intention was to have it actually all set in the one bedrooms, so that made more sense to us from the standpoint of, who would need those and benefit the most.
And are the one bedrooms concentrated in a particular building?
They'd be in two. The front two buildings are identical and would have 4 one bedrooms each.
Gotcha, thanks.
More questions?
Got a question for staff. 2 questions for staff. Staff is pretty silent on 2 things. They're silent on the impact of the $48,000 proffer. When would the proffer, when would we be able to take advantage of that in relation to this project being undertaken? When would the work be done, and when would the community around that benefit from it? Because we've got a huge backlog in public works. And the other is they're silent. They give they offer a mitigating recommendation when it comes to making a motion to support this, but they're silent on critical slopes as well. So I'm wondering if staff could speak to, again, how quickly can we benefit from the $48,000 10 years after development is done or along with it, and a little more analysis on the critical slopes.
Commissioner, I can speak to the proffered donation to the CIP improvements. So there's not a good answer, because this would basically sit in a fund waiting for a project in that neighborhood. So there's not a time horizon built into the proffer. As far as it's not a loan, it is just a donation, but it is tied to this neighborhood. So it would just depend on when a project was elevated in this neighborhood.
So follow up. So there's a calculation in Mr. Shipp's proposal that kind of walks us through how the $48,000 would work. Would we benefit more? Would it be a greater benefit to that neighborhood if Mr. Shipp and his team just use that money to do the installations of the sidewalks that they're doing, or
they are required to do sidewalks that are in front of their property. So this is an addition to, so they're going, that is on the developer's expense. When you develop land, you have to provide sidewalks or request a waiver. There's a waiver process.
But I'm wondering if it's legal and can we do it? And if it's possible, could he spend the money in addition to what he's required to do in that neighborhood to make the pedestrian experience better?
That would be off-site improvements. I'll defer to our city attorney to see if she would like to say anything about off-site improvements.
And the reason I ask is because I know what our backlog is, our work backlog, and I'm concerned that unless the developer does the work, it's going to be a while before we get to it.
I think that's a fair statement.
Ms. Robertson?
So since this is a rezoning and these are proffered conditions, which must be proffered voluntarily, the question for you can't require him to do it, but I don't know sort of what his thoughts are as to whether or not it would be feasible for the same amount of money to construct the sidewalks himself.
Mr. Shimp, would you like to speak on that topic?
Sure. I just want to clarify, so we would put the money in up front, just so that everyone was clear about that. Like our contribution is due at the first building. So the money will be available, but you will make a good point. When the city will spend it is out of our control, certainly. And we're not opposed necessarily to some specific amount. The trouble with it is we have to start doing that. We have to go find a place to put a sidewalk in, survey it, engineer, figure out the right of way. These things, as part of it, they don't happen quickly. There's kind of a lot of lead work into it. And so that was our thought with donating the money, was that you have a sidewalk fund, and ideally the city is going around, if they have any more staff, to identify, these places where it can be done, and using that money along with other monies to be, larger projects. Although there are, I would point out, I mean, I see the city all the time going around fixing, handicap ramps and where there are poles in the way, doing, bump outs for folks to get around and things like that. I don't know if that comes from the sidewalk fund, but those are the sort of things that are also meaningful, and those are maybe, $5,000, $10,000 a piece. So you could do 5 or more projects like that with the money we've offered. It's just a matter of, it's simpler because we don't have the right to go on people's property, and it's just harder for us to go and execute those off-site improvements, thus the contribution. I'm not saying we're not totally against it. If we could figure out a defined section that everyone could agree on, we'd be up for it. But that itself creates challenges as well. So thus the contribution of the money, because it seemed like the fairest way to allocate a sort of contribution from us that could be more collaboratively or collectively looked at and said, where's the best place, rather than us picking a spot. That was the thought.
So I'd like to talk a little bit more about the critical slopes, but I'll defer to other commissioners because I think I've taken up more time than should have been allotted.
Happy to hear others.
Sure, I have a few questions. Thank you for the presentation. I know I wasn't on the planning commission before when this came around, so I might have some redundant questions. Just quick one, I guess, off the bat is just looking at this. I appreciate going for the maximum density on a vacant plot of land and that missing middle housing, but I was wondering did the client consider an R2 project that fits within, this property, or, what was the reasoning for going for that R3 rezoning?
Well, certainly that's, an option. Should this not be approved, that's what's there. There's a layout. You could do a couple, kind of duplexes, like 4-bedroom, each unit, student housing kind of style, which is not, not a bad thing. We just don't think it's the best kind of development. You would end up with similar structure sizes. In some ways, it's a benefit to us, because what we don't have to do if you do that, and you're clever about it, you can, sell a couple of lots, and you don't get into building, stormwater management facilities, parking lots. Like, for example, a duplex, there's a driveway and a couple parking spaces, all you're required. You're not required to do all this additional site engineering. So it certainly was looked at, but is, my opinion that these sort of pieces of land really should try to be a little more creative with and get some more density. At the end of the day, if there's a right of way we can potentially close, and we could get 4 duplexes on here, right? So if we did 4 bedrooms, that's 8 units, 4 bedrooms apiece, that's 32 bedrooms. We're asking for 48 bedrooms. So it's not a huge stretch at the end of the day over the by right. It's just, in our mind, a better housing project. Getting those 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms that we think there's a big need for people in the community trying to find housing. So could it be done as R2? Yes. Should it be done? In my opinion, no. That's why we're here. But it certainly is an option, but in our mind, the one that really is missing out an opportunity to do a better housing project.
Okay. Thanks. My second, I guess, question or kind of concern is my major concern, other than all, the traffic I'm sure somebody will get to, is regarding the affordable housing units. And I know it's not your intention, but the language in the application kind of leaves the door open to, those units that are around 60 to 80% AMI for 10 years. I would hope that they're not the ones located in essentially the basements of the 2 buildings on the front. And, if that is the case, and I'm not a finance guy, but wouldn't those units anyways be kind of like cheaper to rent out since they're sunken into the ground?
If that was the case, that might be. They actually are not, though. They are on the first floor of the front buildings. So all the affordables are in the 3-story buildings up in the front, which is not sunken in. So The sort of sunken in unit is in the back building, which would be a market rate unit per our current proposal.
But at any point in the, I think in the language, you can swap them around, right? In the language of the proffer. But I guess they
That-
wouldn't be
that
one
is
bedroom,
true.
yeah.
Right, yeah, the city attorney, yeah, it depends. These are the kind of questions I think that you discussed with the city attorney some, but the intention was that they would remain the one bedrooms would be the affordables. And there would be 8 of them. They are in the front building, they're on the first floor.
Thanks.
May I chime in with a response as well?
Please.
Thank you. So, my name is Kelsey Schlein. I'm a planner with Schimpf Engineering. So I think additionally with the language in there that allows you to move it around, in the covenants, there's also some language in there. So for example, you could have somebody live in an affordable unit, they get a raise, they no longer qualify for their for their affordable unit after there's a grace period in there for them to remain with the affordability period. But like, you know, let's say they love their unit, it was affordable, they got a raise, they no longer qualify that. And so the owner needs to fulfill providing 8 units, and they then can shift that around to allow that one tenant to remain in the which was formerly affordable unit. I hope that clarifies some things.
Yeah, thank you.
Additional questions? Mr. Mitchell?
Yeah, I like to wonder why the analysis was quiet on the critical slopes. I mean, there were recommendations, there were recommended mitigating motions at the end, but there wasn't much analysis. And I pray that I haven't scared staff off by raising this every time they present something.
I see Mr. Dawson on. Would you be willing to speak to this?
Sure. We did not look at this again since the last time it came from the Planning Commission. And there is not, depends on the project, how much analysis you get on these things, because it's kind of obtuse, the guidance that we're given to provide to you and the way it's compiled through our various divisions, et cetera, et cetera. But doing lots of these critical slope things, I can tell you, and having looked at this before, there's essentially the 2 findings that we're supposed to provide guidance on with looking essentially at within the state's stormwater requirements, our water protection ordinance, and then the 6 or 7 items that are listed specifically in critical slopes. And so most of those, you know, it's essentially 2 things that we discussed about before: disturbance during construction, which keeps the sediment from moving into the streams, and then there's sort of more of a general description for preserving environmental, and I don't have it in front of me, the existing features on the site. And so most of what we focus on for this site, it's really just the stream. That's an environmental feature here because there is so much kudzu. And so again, the threats to the stream really are during construction as well. So that was our focus, and that's where the recommendations come in. I could say very generally, there are some sites that probably will come before you eventually that are pretty nice, sort of like pocket forests and things like that. This is not one of those. So staff, Public Works Engineering was a lot more focused on the erosion sediment control aspect of this, which is why our recommendations are geared towards a 4-stage planning. And I believe, I don't know that we saw a plan, but I know that Mr. Schimpf and I discussed that at some point prior to the last meeting, which is where we arrived at our recommendations so that it could be done. And then the only other thing I'd point out, we discussed this last time, on this vein of preserving or not destroying natural benefits, is the stream. It's obviously it's not the greatest stream. Touching it sort of necessitates stabilizing it at the very least, to make sure it can flow within reason, what's coming to it, especially depending on the developer. Those are all in code. And so what I would just, when in the engineering field, restoration, stream restoration is something pretty specific, and it's probably not what's ultimately going to occur on this site. But again, that being said, the stream essentially starts here at the outfall from the railroad. It's not like it's a segment between 2 pristine drainages, you know, with trout rising and all sort of benthic invertebrates and all those things. So this is probably not the most eligible site for this sort of thing. for a real restoration, but I pointed that out last time. I just want to reiterate that again, that what's going to be done to the stream is essentially like a stabilization, which is probably what's most appropriate for a stream like this in this location. But again, there's not a huge trade-off and loss of natural beauty for this particular parcel, as long as it is constructed well in accordance with the erosion control scheme that was the guidance that we issued essentially.
So with that, I think you're suggesting that the mitigating statements that you guys have included in a suggested motion give you comfort.
Very generally.
Any thoughts about, I'm assuming you've gone through the site plan and the work that they're going to do to stabilize or restore Rock Creek. You cool with that? You happy with what they're doing there?
That's pretty general at this stage, but it'll have to comply to basic stormwater requirements. You know, they can't propose, we're gonna put vertical faces on it and press some stone into the side of it, call it a day. So that all those details are to be worked out. But again, a true restoration is more of art than science. So I'd rather keep it in the sphere and come away with a culvert that works, a driveway that works, and a stream segment that's in better shape than it was before from a degradation standpoint.
Okay, just to net this out so that I know where I am, because I usually follow where you are. You're comfortable with what they're attempting to do as long as a part of our approval includes the mitigating stuff that you guys put in the amendments. You can nod.
My mute button again. Yes. Yeah, correct.
Okay, cool. Thanks, man.
Additional question, Mr. Stolzenberg?
Yep, thanks. So I've got a couple questions about this cash proffer. I'm intrigued with this idea of using it for easy wins or smaller items like ADA curb cuts. I hadn't really thought about that. And so first question is, can it be used for bus shelters, like a bus shelter at the stop, the end of the road? Are we saying that's within pedestrian improvements? These are staff questions, frankly.
Mr. Offley, are you still with us?
I was getting that going. I think that to generally answer that, yes, anything that is pedestrian, but I say that with the caveat of there has to be a project. So not to bring up other projects to align this with, but just because it's fresh in everyone's mind, the Stribling situation. When we talk about making public improvements, and we're talking about contributing to public improvements, there's the assumption there is a plan. That is something that is being contributed to. In this situation, the applicant is, they're wanting to provide money toward a project. There's just not a project, so they're saying here's money. When there are projects that are pedestrian based, this money can be used for it. Yes, it would be much cleaner if we had a list of projects that were ready to go, and the applicant said, I'm going to contribute a percentage to X project. But that unfortunately is just not where we're at. We are at a situation where the infrastructure improvements are not keeping up with what some of the developers are wanting to do.
Right. Yeah, no, I get that. So we'd have this pot of 48,000, and if say CAT wanted to go install a bus shelter, they could draw from it. My next question, I'm looking on Street View right now, and I see the intersection of Cherry and Valley. It does not have an ADA compliant curb cut, and I forgot to look at the curb cut when I was out there. But on the west side, it's just a raised curb, and on the east side, there is a cut, but there's no, yellow truncated domes for the visibility impaired. I know that the city has to go around and replace those, as a matter of course. We have a CIP item for that. Do we have any sense of when, if ever, we would ever get to this one?
That I might defer to our city engineer, just because I know there is a continuing list of ADA improvements, and Jack might not know that offhand, but just in general, you can confirm or deny if there is kind of a list of these.
There is a multitude of lists that are generated from various sources and of various priorities that are handled by various departments. And we've attempted to tackle that several times. The ADA coordinator position is one that's not consistent. So we've had some trouble getting that done. So I can't clearly answer your question. Public service does a lot of the replacement of existing ramps that aren't compliant, and then NDS does the ramps or new ramps where situations like this where there's not a ramp that requires design. And so it's being ironed out the most efficient way that we can actually tackle all these things and prioritize them. So I cannot answer your question specifically now.
Okay. But I mean, I think I'd say like whether there's a specific thing on the list or not, for anyone walking west along Cherry, plus everyone walking from this street, not having any curb cut at all is going to be a big impediment to people who need those, right? And so that could be a good project. I'm also thinking about, other kind of strategic like stretches. I know we don't really do kind of those like really small sidewalk projects. We talked about that with the rayon thing. It looks like the good news is here, the really most dangerous part of the road to me would seem to be that big bend, right? And that part does have a sidewalk just for that part. So the thing I'm wondering about is, how there's that stretch of Baker Street that kind of turns, it's almost like a cul-de-sac little part that branches off.
Sorry, is this relevant to this project?
Yeah, it is. And it goes into Valley Road or into Valley Creek, right? Is that the sort of, if you know what area I'm talking about, it might help to look at a map. Is that sort of like pedestrian bridge that would span 10, 15 feet? Is that the sort of thing that the city would do or could partner with RTF on or something? That could be a use of this fund?
That was for me.
It's across from 503 Valley.
That's not something that we typically do. That most likely be something that Parks would initiate through the Trails program because that's sort of external to right-of-way pedestrian activity. Yeah, it's it could be complicated trying to tie projects to this funds and this project. That's sort of the issue, is that the impact's general. You don't know, the trips are generated at these units. And the destination is these units, where they're going to, where they're coming from, nobody knows. And so that's how you immediately jump, if it's not in the frontage here, to make a logical connection, that again, they sort of have to proffer that. We can't step in and come up with a project. Again, we're struggling to get some, get some of these things done as is. It's not like we got, and it's convoluting the process to sort of look for projects there. So yeah, that's probably a little bit out of what we typically would do this fund. It most likely would go to build up a pool to build a sidewalk once we get enough money to build a length of sidewalk.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Palmer, then Mr. Mitchell. It's in the university's backyard here. Do you have some questions on this?
Well, the only thing that came to mind, and it's more for clarity and just understanding the affordable housing proffer. So, I'm thinking of it from the UVA student perspective. Let's say if I'm a poor graduate student, would I qualify for one of these affordable units if I was making like, if my, salary was less than 65% of the AMI, or are they offered through a different channel that would be targeted towards like families or different population within Charlottesville?
Yes, yeah, you would qualify. I mean, the language in the covenants that speaks to the 80% AMI or the 65% AMI is an up to verbiage in there.
And Mr. Mitchell?
Just want to get back to Mr. Stolzenberg's comments and just ask him to help me understand how he believes what he's suggesting would help with the pedestrian issue that we've got at this site.
Sure. Well, the curb cuts at the end, I think, are pretty straightforward in the bus shelters. I mean, it doesn't exactly help with along the length of the road. The pedestrian bridge to Baker Street has the advantage of Baker Street has sidewalks all along. So any pedestrian walking along and trying to get to Cherry could kind of short circuit a whole section of Valley that they wouldn't have to walk along without sidewalks. That's the goal there. I think maybe my point was like, you know, if that sort of thing would be in the purview of Parks and Rec or even RTF, and a shelter would be under the auspices of CAT, you know, maybe there are these kind of small win projects that could be done with this relatively small pot of money that you know, might happen in the near term without putting more load on NDS. And if they don't happen, then, you know, they get added to the pot for a sidewalk project in the neighborhood later, like Mr. Dawson said.
Yeah, my only, I like small wins are like small, quick wins as we do this. My worry is that the development will happen and the $48,000 will be put in the pool and not used for 5 years, 10 years, right? Or not used to create a mitigating situation as relates to this development. Thanks, but that helps, Rory.
Questions for the applicant and staff?
I had a question or wanted to have kind of, I guess, a conversation with staff about, we heard in the staff report that there were some questions about the affordability component and proffer and language. And I understand there's been some information that's come to light by the applicant. And I noted in your presentation, Mr. Schimpf, you mentioned percentage AMI, and I didn't find that anywhere in the staff report or application materials. So is that 60 and 65 and 80% AMI provision something that would be updated in the proffer statement, or or is there clarifying language that staff would want to see to kind of solidify these affordability, like to be more specific?
Kelsey, do you want to jump in on that? The short answer is we do have that language. We've had the language for the proffered rate. It's really more about some of the details of exactly which units they were and then how they might be swapped around. But yeah, we've had the proffered sort of range of affordability in the application. But Kelsey, do you want to maybe outline how we structured that, just so it's clear? You'll explain it better than I will.
Yeah, certainly. So the proffer that was put forth references covenants, and in the covenants there is a description for a qualified tenant. And then in those covenants, that's where the qualified tenants are described as up to 65% for the units, and then up to 80% for more of the units. And so, I mean, we've been trying to, you know, figure out this affordable housing thing for a while, and we'll keep working at it for clarity. And so, you know, if that clarity is needed within the proffers, then we'll keep working with staff to clear that up. We had just, when submitted this, thought that we had presented clarity with the proffer referencing the covenants.
Could we hear from Ms. Kelly about that?
Please.
So one of the concerns staff has, and I would ask that the city attorney jump in and correct me if I misspeak. One of the concerns staff has is that we have to react to the proffer. Since the covenants are not in place, we might be able to iron out details in the covenants, but if there's disagreement, it goes back to what was the approval based on the proffer that was offered. So that's why staff has put forward the concerns. We have met since the item was posted, and we got some clarification that these will all be for rent units, because we also are concerned that there's some conflicting language in the proffer that almost makes it seem that some of them may change towards home ownership. So we also had that concern that is listed. But more or less, we think the issue is more that we as staff have to react to the proffer. And the covenants have not been developed, which may spell out more issues, but the proffer is the guiding document.
Robertson, do you have something to add on that?
I'm sorry, was that for me?
I was asking Ms. Robertson if she had.
Yeah, so I think that the housing issue is so complicated because it all comes to paperwork. And so Ms. Kelly is correct, what you will see in the proffers is a commitment for rent workforce affordable dwelling units, where the monthly cost of rent doesn't exceed 125% of fair market rent. And then for rent affordable dwellings where the cost of rent doesn't exceed fair market rent for the Charlottesville MSA. Unfortunately, the draft covenant that the applicant intends to sort of implement those proffers isn't in your packet. That covenant does reference the information that Mr. Schimpf gave you, which is that half of the affordable units would be reserved for households having income of less than 65%, and then half of the required affordable units would be reserved for households with income of less than 80%. So one thing, if the applicant's willing to consider it, might be, and I don't think this would require additional advertisement, but would just be to clarify in the paragraphs that reference the rent amounts, reference the percentage of AMI, if that would be acceptable to the applicant, because that would sort of close the loop and include that information in the proffers themselves. But I do believe that the applicant's intention in submitting these together was for them to work together. We possibly need a little more detail in the proffer itself.
Mr. Schimpf, can you speak to that?
Yes, that's right. I mean, I think if you look at the two documents together, the proffer and the covenant, they wrap up essentially our intention of affordable housing here. And it spells out quite a bit of details within that document. I think maybe the issue was how that got coordinated and reviewed internally with the city folks is a little bit different. It was sort of out of a meeting we had with Ms. Robertson months ago now, with the idea that there would be some sort of more kind of a standard template on most of these projects as this covenant. And the proffer would fill in kind of the main issues and the covenants attached to that. The covenant gets recorded with the property before the site plan is approved, which is actually a deeded restriction, not just a proper restriction on these things. I think we're heading in a good direction with how to implement these, but we maybe didn't get exactly perfect with this first go around. However, I think our intentions as to what was offered was clear. If you read all the stuff that we submitted, fortunately you missed a piece of it. But in what was turned in, I think we can work with the city staff to make it clear, however it needs to be enforced, that those are the binding conditions, the ones we've discussed tonight.
If the applicant's willing, I think that's a housekeeping matter that we can tidy up, and before we do a final proffer statement, we can just add that level of detail into the final proffer statement.
Thank you, that's helpful. Additional questions for the applicant and staff?
Is that something we should craft into any motion we do, or is that something that legal and the applicant will work on after the fact? Ms. Robertson.
I'm fine either way, but if you would like to include in that motion a reference to the fact that the applicant has agreed that the percentage of AMI will be added into the final proffer statement, that would be fine.
I just want to make sure that we're going to say it's the lower of either. If that's what we're adding, like keep the FMR and say if you're adding the AMI, the lower of which is which. Does that make sense? Because I think the AMI levels you said are a little bit higher actually than the FMRs would be. But of course, FMRs can change over time based on the market.
Yeah, what we're trying to do is, and again, this is not optimal because we're trying to do this without the guidance of a finalized, affordable housing program formally. But what we're trying to ensure that people are not focusing solely on AMI and not without a care for whether the rent's affordable to people with that AMI. And also that we're not focusing solely on rent, which would allow people who don't fall within the income levels to rent them. So we're trying to make those things come together. And as I really appreciate the efforts that Mr. Shemp and Ms. Schlein have put in so far to work with me and Ms. Kelly, because I think we're making a lot of progress. These documents are getting better. But we still, we still have a lot of work to do, not only in these applications coming through, but in our affordable housing program in general, so that we don't have to have this level of discomfort every application. We know exactly what we want in the documents. So I can work with Mr. Shemp and Mr. Ikefuna and Ms. Kelly, and we'll get the language as close to the language of the city's administrative regulations, which is the only guidance we have right now that's official.
Thank you. Questions from council for staff and applicants?
I'll say that my major concern with the project, and I may just be taking a very superficial look at it, is simply Valley Road Extended is a mess. And I wonder whether there either is or should be some effort that the city makes to do something better by Valley Road Extended. If we're going to be approving more density on that street, and I mean, there's not even street definition in many parts of that street. And I just wonder what the long term of that street is, and are we going to say, sure, let's throw another 28 units on the end there. I think it's probably fair to say, I haven't thought about it deeply, but that's probably about doubling the capacity of the road, doubling the use of the road, doubling the number of dwelling units on the road. Does that make any sense at all for a road that is in that poor shape?
Mr. Rothman, do you want to take that?
That is a concern. One of the big concerns from staff and from the traffic engineer was just the condition of Valley Road Extended and any kind of large development at the end of it. And two, if there even could be improvements to Valley Road Extended in the future due to the constraints of Rock Creek to one side. Right now you're seeing, cars have to pull over to pass. People are using the western side for parking. There's not a definition of even where, I think that's maybe I'm not sure what the right-of-way width is. I think it's a varying width right-of-way road. So when you even talked about improvements, long-term to Valley Road, you're talking about, you can really only go to one side, and what could those improvements even be that would impact the neighborhood as regarding parking or curb cut, sidewalk, that nature.
I mean, I'm also concerned, quite frankly, about what would happen on Valley Road Extended during the construction phase. I don't know how construction vehicles are going to get down there. But I mean, that's my concern. I'll let other folks ponder whether that's a fatal flaw, but that's what my questions are about at this point. Thank you.
Mr. Schimpf, can you speak to construction vehicles? Can they get in there?
Sure. Well, they certainly can. I mean, we get construction vehicles into all sorts of places more complicated than that. Now, look, is that the widest road in the city? No. So I think I don't have the measurements in front of me, the narrowest width or things like that. But, you know, we're talking about building essentially like 4 large houses, which is a project, but it's going to be done. The vertical construction should take maybe 4 or 5 months to get through. There is a period of time where there's going to be some delivery trucks. There'll be some people going down, working within the road. But I don't know that it would be meaningfully different than sort of what the by right is, right? If you built 4 duplexes or 4 7-unit buildings, it's a little more materials, a little more labor, but it's going to be a similar amount of traffic. People coming in and out building. I don't know necessarily it's a great this zoning. In this instance, we're not proposing a 7-story steel building, right? That require different cranes and things like that. The same framers, the same electricians, the same plumbers are going to work on either project. So I recognize the concern, but I would just say I'm not sure how much the change in zoning changes the construction issues. And certainly there are more trips overall through the day, but we're talking about if you do the by right to our zoning change, it is that down. Sorry, about 70, about 80 or 90 additional trips versus what the sort of by right development would be. So it does add trips. I don't know how many trips in that road now, how many units in that road now. I think we're doubling it, but it would add trips. These are all 1- and 2-bedroom units. They have fewer trips than, let's say, a 4-bedroom unit that might be there otherwise. But I don't think it's double. It's an increase. And as I said, it's a couple cars, it's a car every few minutes. I'm not going to pretend it's not. But I also think that you'd find that if you look kind of in any infill development on the city, you're going to find a spot where the road's not perfect, the sidewalk's not perfect. I can think of very few times I've run across a site the infrastructure was terrific all around it. Maybe never in Charlottesville. So these are kind of issues that come with these infill projects, and you have to weigh that benefit of getting those folks into the city in a place that's good for them against sort of the infrastructure being maybe not by the book. And that's going to be a judgment call. I certainly between now and the city council meeting go out and make some measurements and surveys and talk about that more specifically. But to the construction point, I think it's somewhat the same either way it gets built.
How many dwelling units are there on Valley Road Extended at the moment? Anybody know?
It's a fine question. I will say the chat, someone just put up that the staff report identified 600 to 700 vehicles per day currently.
And I guess my question is, if you've got 600 or 700 trips a day, and again, I haven't done the count, but I'd be surprised if there were more than 28 dwelling units on Valley Road Extended at the moment. It's essentially doubling the number of units on the road. I wonder why we would not then assume essentially a doubling of the number of trips. I mean, maybe my initial premise is faulty. Maybe there are actually 5 times more dwelling units on Valley Road. Maybe there are actually 150 dwelling units already there. I don't think so.
There's currently about 27 structures, but I would say over half of those are 2-family. So around 40, I would say around 40 dwelling units.
Okay, so if we figure 40 units generate 600 or 700 trips, why do we think that 28 more units will only generate 60 or 70 more trips?
Well, I know, I say more than what's the comparable by right? We would generate, according to calculations, 171 additional trips for our project in total. If we just built the duplexes, it'd be more like 80 trips, right? So The road is based on the current zoning, in addition to 80 trips in total per day, and then 170 under this
I see. Okay.
proposed project.
Mr. Dawson, does that, can you confirm?
Yeah, so I was just gonna note, I'm not a traffic engineer and the city traffic engineer is not here, but I don't wanna, I referenced stream restoration as art. Traffic trip, there's a manual, the ITT traffic trip generation manual, and I think as Justin alluded to there, it's based on housing types a lot of times and bedrooms, and so it's not a perfect calculation. But that's essentially the industry standard, obviously, which you have to go off of. So, and like a lot of the other projects, the way the trip generation work looks primarily at levels of service, which doesn't necessarily get into dated sections of streets that are essentially yield streets and with ad hoc parking and all these things like that. So the traffic engineering is not the end all be all, obviously, of the existing situation, and it's just a tool that's used. So that's part of where the discrepancy comes from.
Thank you. Councilor McGill.
Thank you. So thank you, Lisa and staff, for also bringing up about some of the issues with figuring out the affordable housing component. For me, that's a very important issue. When I run some kind of quick and dirty calculations, 80% AMI, if you're thinking 1/3 of your income is supposed to be going towards your dwelling, that would mean that the rent would be around $1,458 without taking into account utilities. With a 65% AMI, in order for it to meet like that fair housing standard by HUD, where 1/3 of your income is going towards utility, and this is not thinking about utilities, would be $1,184.50. So, and then fair market rent for our area for 1-bedroom apartment is $1,077. So I get a little bit, even though if something is HUD eligible, voucher eligible right now, honestly, all apartments have to take vouchers. But what's the problem is background checks, criminal records, and also then fair market rent, because HUD will only reimburse up to $1,077. So there's still this gap potentially. I just don't know. What I'm bringing up is, it's one thing to talk about AMI, it's more about the actual rent that's the issue. And then additionally, there was something about, I just want to clarify whether or not students would be considered to be under this AMI, full-time students.
Could I jump in and clarify the rent? Kelsey, please tell me if I got this wrong, but I believe the proffer has written that the rents are based on the FMRs. The eligibility is based on the income. So the rent levels are 4 units at the FMR, and then 4 units at 125% FMR. That correct, Kelsey?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, because it's really a two-pronged approach, right? Like, you want to cap the rent to ensure that that it's voucher eligible and that it's, meets HUD FMR levels. And then additionally, you want to ensure that qualified people are actually occupying those units. Mm-hmm. So that who need the housing at that price point the most. So it is a two-pronged approach. The proffer is limited to 4 units at 125% HUD FMR. So for the 1-bedroom, that's $1,346, utilities included. And then 4 of the units are limited to HUD FMRs, which is a current, fiscal year 2022 is 1077, as you just stated, utilities included in that number.
Ms. Kelly, can you please weigh in on this?
So the information provided by everyone is correct. So 2 items, it's my understanding, I might be wrong, but it's my understanding that Housing Authority is approved by HUD to issue vouchers up to the 125% FMR. at this point because of the costs of housing in Charlottesville. And also, as to the question about the students, it's also my understanding that we can't restrict renting to folks because of their employment or education or non-employment. If they meet the guidelines, they meet the guidelines, you know, provided it's the income verification and the age, you know, all those types of things. So, and as Ms. Robertson said, what will happen between the proffer and the covenant and the language is that basically you're not, the applicant or the property owner, project owner will not be picking or choosing if it's an AMI or if it's an FMR. They will have to comply with both, basically, is how that works. Did they answer your question?
I mean, I know that there was, and maybe that's because it was LIHTC units, maybe, because I know at some point there was a restriction on properties that I worked in that somebody could not be a full-time student for more than 5 months out of the year. And that was I mean, and this was years ago, so maybe that's changed since then. That's just what I wanted to kind of, because I had to have someone move out once.
Right, law.
And I don't know the answer to that. I can try to find that out before the city council meeting and you know, so we can clarify. I don't know the answer to that right now, but I don't think we can restrict people only based on the income issue.
I can make a call to somebody. I'll take care of into that. And then if it is, I'll shoot the info to you. How about that? I mean, but again, one of my deep hesitations on some things is we want to put fair market housing in, and we're looking at this, but then if the landlord doesn't make the allowances for someone potentially having had some bad credit in their past, having had issues that caused them to not be able to make enough money to necessarily live in Charlottesville, that they can still be denied the housing even though they can afford it with the voucher system and everything. And I don't know, we can't write that into proffers. We can't, I mean, I just am bringing that concern to me, my concern up.
Additional questions from council? Councilor Hill?
I have comments, but not questions at this time, so can move on.
I appreciate the clarification. Thank you. Last call for questions for the applicant and staff. Commissioner Habab?
Just switch gears a little bit. I have a quick question. How many, just out of curiosity, how many accessible units are proposed in this development?
There would be 4, 1 per unit. The first floor of each building is one standalone 2-bedroom unit. And so you'd have your, you know, it's right off the sidewalk. You'd have your accessible parking space, you know, under the cover of the roof, and then you would go into the unit on grade.
Thanks.
Additional questions? I believe we are prepared for public comment. Mr. Rice, can you please lead us off?
Sure thing, Chair. And at this time, if you'd like to address the commission on matters pertaining to 1613 Grove Street, please click your raise hand icon, or if you're joining us by phone, press *9. You will have 3 minutes for comment. And first up, we have Kevin Hildebrand. Kevin, you are on with the commission. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak again. I want to applaud Councilmember Snook for his recollection of the condition of Valley Road Extended. There, if you go back to my testimony 2 hearings ago, I did give specific numbers, but this unit or this development represents about a 40% increase on the street as far as unit count goes. And the applicant has said something about 8 units, but my understanding is that there are 3 lots currently that are not developed. So by right development would be 6 duplexes or 6 units in 3 duplexes, I believe, not 8. And so 28 units represents quite a substantial increase over 6 units that are by right. I'd like to also reiterate that this would be the first foray of R3 zoning south of the railway under the current zoning map configuration. And that is inconsistent with the development of the street or the capacity of the roadway. Also, with the recently recommended future land use map and comprehensive plan update that the council just undertook last week, this site remains a general residential site, not a medium density site. And I think we would all agree that at 28 units, what we're talking about is a medium density development, R3 development on this site. So I would strongly urge the commission and the council to reconsider this, even in light of the, I think the offer of 8 affordable units. If you were to look at this under the proposed zoning as general residential, with 3 lots at by right development, 4 units per lot, that would be 12 units. And then beyond the 12 units, you would get into an affordability component. So what you're basically giving with this development is 8 additional market rate units to offset the proffer of the 8 affordable units. And I just don't think that's fair. But the basic issue is that the roadway is not appropriate for this level of development at the end of a dead-end road. And I would suggest that you look at the decisions that you made relative to the Woolen Mills site and the dead-end road there, where you made the conscious decision to remove it from medium density and turn it back into general residential intensity as part of the FLUM and the new comprehensive plan. The other thing that concerns me is the $48,000 proffer for Fifeville. This really isn't Fifeville. Fifeville stops at Patton Street. This money should be used for Valley Road Extended, and the road is currently collapsing, and this money could be used to fix the roadway.
Thank you very much.
And next up, we have Stacia Reinhardt. Stacia, you're on with the commission, please. I'm sorry, you have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Please unmute.
Oh, it looks
sorry,
like
we
she
can't
is,
hear you.
Chair, she is using an older version of Zoom. I'm going to have to promote her to panelist, if that's okay.
That seems fine. Please. Welcome, please unmute.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, this happened last time. I'm so sorry. Anyway, okay, so I agree with everything that Kevin was saying. I think the biggest issue for this development is the road itself. I live on Grove Street Extended. It's actually kind of going up the other way. So I have to travel the entire length of Valley Road Extended. I walk my dogs every day. My husband walks the dogs in the mornings. My neighbors walk their children on that road. The makeup of the road has changed in the 4 years that we've lived here. When we moved in, it was mostly students. Right now, it's mostly young families. I've seen at least 5 or 6 people walking their children on that road. We don't have sidewalks. Someone mentioned there's sidewalks on the dog leg. Yeah, there's sidewalks, but people park over the sidewalks because there's no other place to park. You know, the ends of their cars cover the sidewalk, so you're still walking in the road. When you're walking in the road and 2 cars are coming, I've had to jump over the guardrail before. I've had to stand in the weeds that are growing along the guardrail that the city lets grow there. They're usually about 2 to 3 feet high. I've had to walk, step into those, trying to get out of the way of cars. If you add people, if you add units, you're adding people. There's a bus stop at the end of Valley Road Extended. So you're going to be walking, all those people are going to be walking to that bus stop or walking back from that bus stop if they don't have cars. If they have cars, they're going to be driving down that road and driving back. You're also increasing not just those trips, but you're increasing delivery trips. There's a ton of Grubhub and DoorDash that gets delivered in the evenings on our road. And those cars, they just stop and they literally stop in the road. They run, you know, and they block the traffic. I've waited for them to deliver food and then try to turn around somewhere before trying to come home. Getting in and out of Valley Road, you know, onto Cherry, sometimes there's, you know, 3 or 4 cars trying to get in or out, and it's very narrow trying to get out. It's very dangerous. So, I mean, that's a big concern. When you talk about the health and safety of, you know, that being the main concern, how are you getting fire trucks down this road if you're adding more cars and more traffic? You know, how are you getting an ambulance down this road if you're adding more cars and more traffic? How are you making it safe for people to walk up to the bus stop if you're adding more cars and more traffic? The road is collapsing, like Kevin said. That's true. That needs to be fixed no matter what happens, like whether or not the development goes in, the road needs to be addressed. There's no way that $48,000 can put sidewalks in, because there are the last meeting, everybody agreed there's no way to put sidewalks in on Valley Road Extended. So that's the traffic it's not appropriate for a building like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if anybody else would like to address the commission on matters pertaining to 1613 Grove Street, please click your raise hand icon or press *9 if you're joining us by phone. Chair, I see no other hands.
I close the public hearing. Thank you very much. I'd like to begin deliberations. I'm getting some odd echo. Starting from Mr. Mitchell, would you like to share your thoughts on this? Please unmute.
The $48,000 that is proffered will not be of immediate value to this project. Again, I don't think it would mitigate the traffic issues that we're dealing with in the area. So I don't see where that is of great value. I am worried that the folks that will benefit from the affordable units will be students. I love UVA students. I love UVA. But I think if we're going to allow rezoning and we're going to allow a special use permit, then we should benefit the greater city as opposed to the institution that I love. So that doesn't help much. By right, even by right is going to put a lot of pressure on the neighborhood, but by right will at least allow us to deal with the kudzu and things. I'm not worried about the critical slopes. I think Mr. Dawson has relaxed my concern about that. So just a stream of consciousness. That's where I am at the moment.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Mr. Abab, please. Where are you?
Right here, Chair. I think, I mean, my two pros and cons, I think it does a lot of things right. You know, the scale fits the neighborhood, the buildings specifically. I appreciate, you know, considering maximizing vacant land, we don't have much left in the city. So the more we can do that, the better. It's right by the train tracks. I think more density in that general kind of like condition is good. There are no major, you know, tree canopy issues. It's an empty plot of land filled with kudzu, and it provides sufficient parking on site. Not that I'm a pro parking advocate, but in this case, it helps, I feel like. So, I mean, it only goes back, and they provide enough. I guess I should say sufficient stream not restoration, but stabilization. The only concern being the traffic. So I'm just throwing out, like, at what point does the balance tilt towards one side or the other with so many prawns and a limited negative impact?
Thank you. Mr.
Yeah, thanks.
Mr. Lehendra, where are you?
I'm in the same place Mr. Habab is. I'm teetering on this thin line. And I have the same positives that Mr. Habab shared about it, and I have the same negatives about traffic. And I mean, I just drove down this road today and had a very difficult time turning around, getting out of it. So I'm waiting for someone to make a compelling argument, one side or the other. I'm teetering.
Thank you.
Where
Ms. Russell.
Well, I don't think you'll hear a compelling argument from me, but I just wonder, sort of how we can be of use as a body, right? And so it seems like what I'm hearing from council is they have some major concerns about what we're talking about. And in that way, I'm wondering, whether we approve or deny, it will go to council. And so if we were to approve or deny, are there conditions in addition to what's being recommended by staff? And I've heard some other revisions, mainly to the proffer, which it sounds like the applicant is comfortable doing, around refining that AMI language, and someone I hope can capture that more eloquently, but the percentage AMI being captured in the proffer, and around flexibility of the use of the proffer funds being flexible in sidewalk, curb cut improvements in that vicinity. Are those amendments or recommendations enough to alleviate the concerns we're all sharing around increasing the traffic? I don't think so. So what are we doing at the end of the day if we can't change this really big concern over the safety of our community on that street? I don't know if that will spur any other conversation, because I feel very divided on this personally. I don't know how to move it forward.
Thank you. Mr. Stolzenberg, where are you?
Thanks. I mean, I'm definitely in agreement that everything about this project is good except for the concern with the traffic. The matching is fine. I'm happy with the stream. I think that's all great. I think it really can't be understated how important 4 units at 65% AMI and another 4 at 75% AMI would be for the people who live in those households. And I'm looking at the housing needs assessment, and where it talks in table A43 in the appendix, the applicants on the wait list for housing choice vouchers or for CRHA housing, 52% of them are single person households, and another 15 are 2-person households that could also probably fit in 2 bedrooms. And people need homes. And that is a really meaningful proffer. At the same time, we also have heard a lot in this process for the future land use map and for the comprehensive plan from a large segment of the community that wants us to maximally utilize our vacant land in particular. And the fact of the matter is most of our vacant land is vacant because it's the marginal land that wasn't the easiest to develop. This is at the end of a almost third of a mile street. I wish I had sidewalks all the way down. It doesn't, but between the affordable housing and the stream improvements, And I'm confident there's enough parking on site in this plan as well. And, you know, whether or not there's an immediate use for $48,000 or whether it'll be put towards sidewalks here, I am very hopeful that there are some small projects, in particular along Valley Road and at the end of Valley Road, that this could be used for. And I think Kat would jump at the chance to take, you know, $15,000 and put it for a shelter there. And certainly an ADA cut so people in wheelchairs can continue going down Cherry would be very valuable. And so the question at the end of the day is, you know, is it worth to get all those nice things to inflict on the residents of this road an extra, you know, 5 cars per hour or a car every 5 minutes it was driving down during the peak hour. And where the alternative is there are 3 or potentially 4 duplexes with their 4 bedrooms and are almost certainly filled by students. And again, I don't really totally understand this thought that all of the affordable units would be filled by students. It seems to me, you know, there's people out there who need affordable units or are waiting for them, who are in the community. You know, students aren't going to be the first to jump on those, I would hope, just in practice, even if it is possible for them to do it technically. So I think at the end of the day, for me, you know, to get 8 affordable units, to have homes for 20 other families starting out in the community for community members and not students living in a 4-bedroom, 4-bath house, I think it is worth an extra car every 5 minutes. And I say that in particular because, you know, most mornings, you know, I walk down Altamont Street, which has a narrower right of way than this, cars on the road, and it has a 24-unit building at the end. It's a bit shorter for certain, and everyone has to walk in the road, and it's okay. There are definitely times where, you know, it could be better, but cars for the most part slow down because they know people are walking. And, you know, I just think of the dozens of people who wouldn't have homes if we had applied these standards universally to everything that already exists. And so to me, I think all the factors make me lean in favor of this project.
Mr. Palmer, words of wisdom, please.
I don't have too much to add. I guess, you know, I asked that question about the student only because I think it's more in the context of a lot of what we've talked about during the comprehensive plan and affordable housing discussions, and not that there's like a value judgment made on who should get those units, but just kind of the optics of, you know, if all those units were occupied and by students, I think some people might, you know, have a negative thought about that. But I appreciate the candid answers and on that question, and I don't really have any other words of wisdom per se, but those are kind of my thoughts.
Mr. Chair, I've got unless there's another commissioner you need to pull, I have a motion.
I'd like to share my thoughts briefly, if I may.
Absolutely. Sure.
Thank you. I've been familiar with the site for a very long time. I originally scouted this many years ago, working on the bicycle and pedestrian plan that we have now. And it is, in fact, an intersection of 2 major bicycle and pedestrian paths, which are not built, have no funding to be built, have no timeline to be built, but they look beautiful on a map. I continue to believe that this would be a spectacular place for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. It makes so much sense where it is. But we haven't gotten the money together. We haven't gotten the logistics together to make that happen lo these many years. The question I ask myself is, do we get it together if we get a by right duplex, or do we get it together with something more creative? I think the city will prioritize this more if there are more people shouting for the safety improvements that frankly should have been there many years ago. My personal sense. Mr. Mitchell, please.
Yeah, I would like to move that we deny the application for rezoning. The rationale is traffic concerns, the fact that we don't know when the $48,000 proffer will be available to be executed on when Public Works can get around to it. We don't know exactly where it's going to go. And even though by right will present a little tension in the area, it's still a better way to go than the additional density. And this is consistent with the comprehensive plan that we recommend to council.
Additional commentary on this?
I think we'd either need a second, or if there's not a second, then we move on to the next motion.
Reasonable. I hear a second. Discussion, please.
So you mentioned the buy right is better. And I'm
It's
thinking
not better, it's not optimal, but it's, yeah, go ahead.
Because it's fewer cars, I'm guessing it's slightly better for traffic maybe. But, you know, I think we just heard about how the street had been all students almost, especially at that end, and has been turning over to families. And, you know, I think that is in part because we built things like West Main that drew people away. I think if you get 4-bed, 4-bath units, those are like explicitly designed for students and will encourage students to live there rather than, you know, non-student community members. And so to me, the advantage of doing it in the form of 1 and 2 bedrooms, you know, slightly more total bedrooms, I think we heard, as the rather large advantage that probably almost all of them, all the people who live there will be community members. And especially, you know, elderly folks who need to downsize into 1 and 2 bedrooms, and young professionals at the start of their careers. Actually, I didn't mention this earlier, but I know a guy who lived right across the street from there in those duplexes that were built about 10 years ago, in like a basement apartment in one of those. Actually, I was at his wedding a week and a half ago. And I know for a fact that he made quite a bit less than, well, let's just say he would have qualified for any of these affordable units. And you know, I know having an affordable place to live at market rate was part of what enabled him to live in our city altogether. And to me, these units seem a lot more likely to appeal to someone like him a few years ago than the 4-bed, 4-baths that would almost certainly be occupied by a bunch of students.
Mr. Landry?
You called on me, Lyle? I'm sorry.
Your square went yellow and I got excited.
Well, I'm just remembering, you know, just driving around today, the city has so many constricted, difficult streets. I live on one that have parking on one side, can only allow one, even though there are two traffic going both ways, only one lane can go at once. People trying to walk their families on it. It just seems like we can zone the hell out of the city, but if the infrastructure is not there to support it, we're going to keep turning down developments. I'm leaning towards what I like what you said, Lau, about maybe this will get the city to start prioritizing and start to work on the infrastructure, and that's the way we're going to be able to grow the density and get the affordable housing. Anyway, so that's as much as I can offer at this point. So I would vote against denying it.
Additional discussion?
I guess I want to say anecdotally, at least I've heard how hard it is to be able to use a voucher to get an apartment, at least especially 1-bedroom units, from people that are looking for them within the, I guess, Virginia housing threshold of, you know, I think it's $1,000, almost a little over $1,000 for that voucher. And just hearing that this project allows people to be able to get those units. I think it provides so much, and the applicant also brought a lot to the table. And I think it just brings a lot of kind of like, I guess, like public good to the residents of our city. I think would vote against denying it.
Additional discussion?
The only other point I'll make is that we have a huge backlog. Allow you suggest that moving forward, projects like this would force the city to move the infrastructure increase and improvements up the ladder. But we have a huge backlog as it is, and we'll soon be talking about the capital improvement program. And most of the money is going to go to school reconfiguration. And so it's going to be a little while before even if we get the $48,000 put into our coffers, it's going to be a little while before we can move the infrastructure improvements up the ladder. So keep that in mind as we think about this project and, more important, other projects.
Ms. Russell.
I just want to say I commend the applicant and the owner in this example for their efforts in trying to work around our rules, right? In this case, I think to what Commissioner Alejandro said about, we have streets where people walk down the middle of them, and it's just sort of like a thing we accept. It's the condition on Grave Street where someone in a wheelchair goes down the middle of the street almost every day because the sidewalks don't have have power poles going through them. But that's not acceptable. And in this, in supporting a denial, I think what I'm personally trying to say is like, this is not indicative of a world-class city that we set out to be. We're all losing in that scenario, and I don't have a solution really. It's just that I just personally feel like this does put too much of a burden on the residents in that on that very constrained street, just like we discussed in Stribling. It's kind of similar. It's like, will it even be possible to make that road better? I don't know. Got to move the power poles. We talked about that in October, and I don't know. This is not an easy vote either way.
Additional commentary, discussion? Ms. Creasy, would you please call the roll?
Sure, let me unmute. All right, and this is for the motion for recommendation for denial for the rezoning request. Mr. Alejandro.
No.
Okay, Mr. Mitchell?
Yes.
Mr. Havad?
No.
Mr. Stolensberg?
No.
Ms. Russell?
Yes.
And Mr. Sola Yates?
No. I believe the motion fails, but thank you for making it. That was constructive. Additional discussion, possible motions?
I would like to have an item of discussion just before we make an additional motion. We have talked about proffer clarifications. I think there was talk about putting AMI levels for eligibility in there. And there was talk about explicitly saying the 48,000 could be used for ADA or bus stop improvements. But I think the applicant may have said in the chat that vaguely alluded that he was okay with it, or that they're okay with it. I would just want to get that confirmed and on the record and say what those changes are, since they're voluntarily offering them.
Mr. Shipp, would you be willing to speak to that?
Sure, yes. We are agreeable to the additions to proffers to discuss to clarify the rent levels and the AMI folks too, as discussed previously. That was our intention the whole time. And likewise with the sidewalk proffer, that too was intended really to be used for whatever was easiest for the city to do in the neighborhood to make the sidewalk infrastructure better. So that is our intention in the proffer, or whatever language it needs to be kind of modified to say that, we're agreeable to.
Thank you, that's helpful. Additional discussion, possible motions?
I would make a motion.
Please state that motion.
I move to recommend approval of this application to rezone the subject property from R2 to R3 on the basis that the proposal would service the interests of the general public and good zoning practice.
Is there a second for that motion? I see a second. And hear one. Discussion on this motion.
Give me 1 second.
You have 5.
Okay, there were some staff recommendations regarding this motion, weren't there?
I don't think in the.
Or were they in the SUP? Their recommendations in the SUP. Okay,
Correct.
cool. Okay, cool.
Thank you. Additional discussion on this topic? Hearing none, Ms. Creasy, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Mr. Lahindra,
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell,
Nay.
Mr. Habab,
Yes.
Mr. Stolensberg,
Aye.
Ms. Russell,
No.
Mr. Stola Yates.
Aye. I believe that passes. Additional discussion, possible motions.
I move to recommend approval of the application. Okay, sorry, hang on. Did we have any extra additional SUP conditions that we had discussed that were not recommended by staff? I don't remember any.
Ms. Russell, I'm looking at you.
I move to recommend approval of this application for a special use permit for tax map and parcels 2301-33000, 2301-34000, and 2301-35000, 1613 Grove Street Extended, to permit residential density up to 43 DUA and adjusted yard requirements as depicted on the site plan dated September 29, 2021, with the conditions recommended by staff.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I hear a second. Discussion, please.
Let's vote.
Hearing none. Ms. Creasy, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Lahindra,
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell,
Hey.
Mr. Habab,
Yes.
Mr. Stolenberg,
Aye.
Ms. Russell,
Nay.
Mr. Stola Yates.
Aye.
Approval.
I believe that passes. Additional discussion, possible motions.
I move to recommend approval of the critical slope waiver for tax map and parcel 3 I said just now, as requested with the conditions outlined in the staff report, based on a finding that the public benefits of allowing the disturbance outweigh the benefits afforded by the existing undisturbed critical slope per section 34-1120B6D1.
Second.
I hear a second. Discussion. Hearing none. Ms. Creasy, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Lahindra,
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Mr. Habab,
Yes.
Mr. Stolenberg,
Aye.
Ms. Russell,
Yes.
and Mr. Stola Yates.
Aye. Goodbye, Kudzu. I believe that passes. I believe we are prepared to close this public hearing. Council, thank you very much. I don't believe you are required, but you're welcome to join us.
Thank you.
Moving forward, as I find my notes, I believe we are moving to a discussion of 2005 Jefferson Park Avenue. How are we feeling? Do we need a short break?
Maybe a quick 3-minute bio break.
I'm hearing 3-minute bio break. I'll see you in 3 minutes. Thank you. And I believe we are back. Welcome all. Hope you are feeling refreshed and strong. I believe we are prepared for a discussion about 2005 Jefferson Park Avenue. Who is leading us off on this? Mr. Offley, is this you?
Yes.
Thank
So
you.
Commissioners, can you hear me?
Sound great.
Commissioners, tonight you're holding a preliminary discussion. Mitchell Matthews, representing the applicant Aspen Heights Partners, is proposing to develop the 1.7 acres of land located at 2005 and 2007 JPA and 104 Observatory Avenue for residential use outside the current by right density parameters. The comprehensive land use map for this area calls for high density residential. Prior to submitting an application to the city for a SUP application and an entrance corridor approval, the applicant and his team is looking for feedback from the Planning Commission on the proposed project. In a moment, the applicant will give a presentation, and at the conclusion of that presentation, Planning Commission may want to consider whether a DUA of 70 at this location is appropriate. If the height of 75 feet is appropriate at this location, and if the rear setback the rear setback they're proposing as part of their presentation is enough to protect the R2 district behind it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mitchell Matthews Architects. Erin Hannigan will introduce her team and provide a presentation to Planning Commission.
Thanks. So, can you hear me?
You sound great. Welcome.
Great. So I'm Erin Hannigan with Mitchell Matthews Architects. Also on the phone tonight is Timmons Group, the civil engineer, and Aspen Heights Partners, the client, if there are any questions that need to be directed to them. I'll run through this quickly, but we've provided a substantial packet with a lot of justification that hopefully you've had time to review in advance. If we can pull up the slides, this is a condensed version of that. If we can go to the next one, as Mr. Affley said, 2005 JPA is a proposed multifamily residential project. It's on Jefferson Park Avenue, and it's residential units over parking below. And we're here to discuss whether our future SUP requests are appropriate, as well as to get your initial reaction to the entrance corridor review that will also take place for this particular parcel. We have 3 requests, and as Mr. Affley mentioned, it's for increased density, increased height, as well as a rear yard setback reduction. And so we'd like to know that we're on the right track with this application before we submit a formal application to you. The parcel is located, as you can see, on Jefferson Park Avenue. It's not far from Central Grounds UVA. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this slide demonstrates that we are in Census Tract 6. And so Census Tract 6 data shows that the median age is 21 and a half. 80% of the people living in this neighborhood are under the age of 29. And we put this up here to show who this project would be impacting. 93% of the units in this neighborhood are renter occupied, and 79% of those are non-family. So that means, as we all know from living here, that it's predominantly student rental population in this neighborhood. And you can go to the next slide, please. This is an enlargement of the site plan. So 2005 JPA, as mentioned, is an assemblage of 3 lots. It has frontage on Jefferson Park Avenue and then extends between Observatory Avenue and Washington Avenue. Washington Avenue is a through street between Jefferson Park Avenue and Stadium Road, whereas Observatory Avenue is a dead end. And we're about a block from the commercial district or commercial properties that are at the intersection of Maury and JPA. Next slide, please. So again, the site is currently all renter occupied, and the pink on this slide is demonstrating those parcels that are renter occupied. We only have one contiguous neighboring parcel to the rear, which is 116 Washington Avenue. And that neighboring parcel stretches as well between Observatory and Washington. And the majority of the other parcels, vast majority, are also renter occupied around the perimeter. And this data comes from the city's GIS data to understand who our neighbors were. If you can go to the next slide. This is the current zoning map, and just running through again the existing zoning on the site. So by right, 21 DUA is allowed, and up to 87 is allowed by SUP, and we're requesting 70. Skipping down to height, 45 feet is allowed max by right, and we're requesting 75 feet from the average grade plane, whereas 101 is allowable with a special use permit. So the 75 feet that we're requesting is in the middle range there. You can see for the range of 22 to 43 DUA, it's still under that 80-foot mark of a height increment listed in the zoning ordinance. The setbacks, the front yard setback is an average of the neighboring properties, Its averages out to 26.35 feet. Because we're on two side streets, both side yard setbacks are 20 feet. And then the rear setback is the interesting one. The minimum is 25 feet, but as you increase in density, there's a jump in the rear yard setback. So the density that we're requesting would put us at a 75-foot rear yard setback. And the first 25 feet of that would still be a type S3 buffer. And we're requesting a reduction from 75 feet to 36 feet for the rear yard setback as our third request under the future SUP application. While we're on this slide, it also shows that the previous zoning designated university high density between the railroad tracks and Jefferson Park Avenue, and then it was step down zoning that went from university high density to R3, which is the northwest side here of Jefferson Park Avenue. And then that stepped down again to R2U. And of course, the 2013 comprehensive plan zoned all of those areas the same, and your current recently approved work reflects more of a corridor perspective to the zoning. In the next slide is existing context in the vicinity. The most recently approved project is number 5, which is near the middle. That project is 6 stories, as you can see on the facade. It has a 25-foot front yard setback, a 25-foot rear yard setback, and 5-foot side yard setbacks. The rest of the projects are greatly varied in their architectural character and height, generally in the district. Can you go to the next slide? This is the site survey, and the existing buildings are in pink. And the thing to point out here is that there's a 3-story drop in grade diagonally across the site. So that is a challenge for the site to deal with that much grade change. The other aspect of this is that the rear, the property to the rear, excuse me, while I take a drink of water. The property to the rear is currently adjacent to a parking lot. It is a fenced parking lot, but that's what they're currently adjacent to. And in the under redevelopment, it would be a 25-foot buffer. Can you go to the next slide, please?
May I ask a question?
Certainly.
Why is the grade change a challenge?
For a project that stretches quite a distance from the front yard to the rear yard, that much grade change means that you have, like other places in the city, there's ways that you have to mitigate the grade change with entrances and connections to different levels.
Thank you.
Sure. This shows the 2013 comprehensive land use map. And again, this is the timeline where the whole neighborhood, for the most part in this vicinity, was all designated as high density residential consistently on both sides of JPA and the whole way to UVA. There was no R2U step down in this vision. And I took out the slide for your current comp plan because I didn't know where it was headed when we submitted the slides. So it obviously, you know it better than I, but it is proposing the mixed use corridor along JPA and recommends heights from 5 to 8 stories. And JPA qualifies as one of the streets that can be up to 8. The next slide, we dive into the actual project. So this is a roof plan of the project. Jefferson Park Avenue is on the right. And to note here, the setbacks are shown. You can see that we're up against the front yard setback and the side yard setbacks. And then in the rear, we've the blue line represents the 25-foot buffer The 75-foot setback is shown and the 36-foot that we're requesting. Excuse me. Other things to note is that the primary entrance is on the corner of Washington and JPA. The pedestrian entrance is focused on that corner. We've taken a lot of effort to design the streetscape along Jefferson Park Avenue. Again, the grade change just between Washington Avenue and Observatory Avenue is 10 feet. So there are a series of terraces that mitigate that grade change. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to take another moment to.
As you need, please. Mr. Offley, while we're taking a moment here, can you help me understand the front setbacks we have in JPA? What's the thinking here?
As far as, I mean, let me pull the code section up. When you say what's the thinking as far as just the.
In many places like this, we do zero setback to the front to create more of a pedestrian friendly experience, but we don't do that here. I'm just interested in why.
I don't know if I can speak to the history of that.
Generally, I have seen pedestrians on JPA.
Yeah, generally we're trying to create a pedestrian friendly feel on JPA. The last 1725 was the last project that came through. That was several years ago. And that was a big focal point of the SUP. But typically, I think probably what it has to do with is we typically see like a build to zone and more like that in our mixed use corridors and not in our R3 corridor or R3 districts.
So while the speaker is hydrating, another question is 1800 JPA, that's the big tower there. How many stories is that and how tall is that?
9 off the dome.
What's that?
I've got 9 in my head.
I think that's correct.
So 9 stories and how many feet? And that's like right at grade, isn't it? There's no slope there. It's just like right at. It kind of looms over JPA, doesn't it?
It's sort of set back a ways, like it's down a side road. But yeah, I don't think there is any downslope. You definitely see it. I would assume it's 101 feet, like our other 9-story buildings, like with
that's probably it. It's probably right.
Height limit.
And that would be the max, because that's our max allowable height.
And that's 3 blocks down, isn't it? 3 blocks towards the university, right? About
3 to 5.
And they're looking, this 75 feet is what we're talking about here. Is that what, did I get that right?
Yes, correct. Our request is for 75 feet.
Okay. And again, Rory, remind me what 1800 is?
I would assume 101, the height limit.
Okay, got it.
I don't know for sure. We don't have that data.
It's probably about right then.
It is 9 stories, and I would say it's right around that 101, maybe a little less.
Thank you. Ms. Hannigan, are you strong?
I hope so. Thank you for the break. So again, we're focusing on the pedestrian experience along JPA because we learned from your comments for the 1725 project that pedestrian experience is important to you. And as an entrance corridor, as well as with the future vision of the comp plan that you just recently recommended, that turns this into a mixed use corridor, that we envision that you will want increased pedestrian amenities and spaces along that corridor. So we've paid particular attention in this submission in our early design work to think about the conditions along Jefferson Park Avenue. And so as we look at the next slide, you'll see that there is a a brick plinth that the building sits on, and that it's low at the street, and we've pulled back the one wing of the building. It's about an additional 45 feet away from the front of the brick plinth. And that, so in the last image, you might have noticed that there was a pool in the corner that is raised and above view and not visible from the street. There it is on the corner Observatory and JPA. So that's up at the top of that brick plinth. And if you again flip forward, the building on the other corner stretches down to grade with its material and massing to highlight the entry condition and draw attention to that side architecturally as the more prominent corner and the entry corner of the project. Again, there are terraces that step down between the higher side of Observatory Avenue and the lower side of Washington Avenue. The 10 feet grade change between those two, and the corner that you're looking at that's there at Observatory, the thought is that that could be designed in a way for future flexibility to commercial space. And so it's small enough to currently work as an ancillary commercial space that works for the current zoning, as well as the idea that it could potentially be a future little coffee shop or some amenity condition like that for the neighborhood on that corner. And then other amenities stretch across from there that would be for the residents. And it stretches down to the entry condition. So as we go to the next slide, this shows again that the orange volume is the maximal buildable envelope, representing the 101 feet from the average grade plane, representing that it's would be likely at the street. It shows you the 75-foot rear yard setback that would be required for that density. In the pink volume, or purple that turns pink when it's overlapping with the orange, is our proposed buildable envelope. And as you can see, the heavy black line is representing where that wing is pulled back, the extra 45 feet. And then again, there's another in-between shade of orange for the wing that's beyond that would come forward to the street. And so at the rear, the important thing to note is that it would only appear as 5 stories because there are 2 stories of parking below grade that are all concealed. And the grade is working to our advantage for that condition to be able to conceal all the parking. And then we'll show you some more slides too for the condition at the street. And to draw attention to the things we've highlighted on the left-hand side of the slide, that against the property line, to the left of that, the adjacent property is currently allowed 35 feet, but under your comprehensive plan that just got recommended for approval, would go up to 5 stories on that lot. And that would be around 55 feet. And that's generally equivalent to the height of the building that we're proposing. And so the 2 conditions become more compatible, which is part of the reason why we believe a reduced rear yard setback is ideal or compatible with the conditions here. That with a dense buffer and that reduced rear yard setback, if we apply a hypothetical bulk plane to the project, which we've used the West Main East zoning ordinance bulk plane as an example, since that's sort of become a precedent, you can see that it's described with that diagonal line. The proposed building massing as well as the maximum allowable both reside under it as another sort of metric to show that we expect that the reason the increase of the rear yard setback was taking place in our current zoning ordinance is because as it steps in height, you would be further and further away from that rear yard property line. So going to the next, while we're on this slide, also again, the project that you previously approved was 25 feet for the rear yard setback. So we're an additional 11 feet beyond the most recently approved project. If we go to the next slide. So this is an enlargement of the floor plan as it would interact with the streetscape along JPA. And this is a bit of a composite. So the right-hand side of the plan of what you're looking at shows the first floor where the lobby would occur at the lowest level. And then the left-hand side is actually showing the floor above that, because again, as it terraces up, different levels would engage with the adjacent grades. And so the corner condition there on the left shows an amenity that could be converted to future potential commercial space and would have access to terraces that would be outside that space. And then we're focused on the ability to provide street trees and external sitting areas that would allow one to interact with pedestrians on the street. Can you move to the next slide, please? This is a view of that entry corner where vertical emphasis is given to the entrance. And you can start to see the terraces stacking up the street in the distance. Can you go to the next image? So this is focusing on the main entrance off of JPA and the terraces there to the left. And you can see above how the other wing is pulled back to help mitigate the massing of the building at JPA. And if you go to the next slide, again, another view of the streetscape and providing interest along that area and engagement with the street. So again, the questions that Mr. Affley outlined: is the density appropriate for this location of 70? Is the height of 75 feet appropriate? Is the rear yard setback reduction appropriate? And I would add a fourth: are we on the right track for the entrance corridor review that would also be undertaken? Thank you. And I'm happy to go back and answer any questions since that was fast, or also answer questions about information that was in the packet that we deleted from the slides.
Commissioners, I'd urge you to consider questions first. I think that's going to help us sort of structure our thinking.
So I would, I always defer to Ms. Lindra when it comes to the entrance corridor stuff. Love to hear what he thinks about the tower abutting against the streetscape, and would love to hear what Mr. Lindra thinks about 75 feet height. Is that appropriate? Because I tend to just do what he tells me to do when it comes to that.
Well, as a matter of fact, I was just looking up the entrance corridor guidelines, but I'll ask Ms. Hannigan, why does Mitchell Matthew feel that this particular design is compatible and represents the city of Charlottesville in how it's designed?
I think the compatibility will come across through the materials, but also the massing and articulation. The two wings of the building help diminish its scale. And with the courtyard that opens onto Jefferson Park Avenue. And again, I think the materials help tie it to Charlottesville. None of that is finalized yet, but we are showing some brick that I believe is consistently liked in Charlottesville. And the colors are yet to be determined for the other materials, but.
Well, it's the entrance to the apartment unit to the right of the brick. I mean, it's deliberately designed to emphasize height and verticality and a soaring structure, which to me that does not say Charlottesville. So that I have an issue with, or just I need to look through the entrance corridors. I'm sorry to be don't have exact references to give you, but I suspect that there's a lot of discrepancy between the way that entrance to the apartment is designed and Charlottesville's characteristics. So yeah, the brick is great right there at the corner. You can't beat that. But the rest of it looks like it's modern materials, sheathing, and I'm not seeing that it's compatible architecturally with compliant architecturally with the entrance corridor guidelines.
So a couple of questions for Jody, because again, I always go to Jody for this. Keep in mind 1800 JPA and how towering that is. Would you be happier if the tower on Washington Street were set back just a little bit more, or does that not get the job done?
I'm less bothered about what happens on Washington and Observatory, but I do like the fact that it's set back because of the brick and the swimming pool and there in that corner. That works fine. It's the other corner that I wish there was more of that horizontality expressed in the brick on the left side. Somehow that being expressed on the right side also, or carried over, instead of a complete contradiction from horizontality and brick to verticality and all modern materials. I'd like to see something that it doesn't necessarily have to be lower, but certainly the way it's designed can be more horizontal in feel than especially the way it's designed now, which is just the opposite, to emphasize its height.
Mr. Offley, can you do you have access to the corridor guidelines? I don't have them in front of me.
I don't have quick access. I can look while y'all keep discussing if you'd like.
Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll yield back because I was going to just pretty much do what Jody tells me to do. So.
Yeah, you put me on the spot here. So let me look too.
I have some questions about if we can even back up, but to the existing conditions, the applicant's thought process. And I would love some help understanding how they arrived at their existing unit of 17. When the site today, I dropped a link to the current owner's, I guess, listing for the rentals. It's a unique site with lots of little hodgepodge of structures. If people on this panel are not aware, there is a mansion really that predates 1920 because it shows up on the 1920 Sanborn as the only structure basically in that whole entire block. There's a really cool long alley that's lined with, I don't know, boxwood or something like that from JPA all the way back to that columned residence that's in really good condition, and the pictures show beautiful interiors. I counted 37 bedrooms total on gradhousing.com between those four buildings, and I think that's even missing the building fronting JPA, which is I think maybe 2007. So question is, where is that 17 unit number coming from? And can you tell me about your thinking in demolishing this historic structure, was there any thought in incorporating that into a site plan that, to the point of the design guidelines, would keep the historic integrity intact?
So the 17 units, not 17 bedrooms, 17 units came from the count that the existing owners provided to our team. I've not gone in every building to verify that there are 17 units total, but that's where that came from. So that's units, not bedrooms. I don't know if that's the discrepancy, explains the discrepancy. As for the existing structures on site, none of them are individually protected buildings. It's not in an architectural control district, obviously. It's just the entrance corridor. And at this particular location, close to the university, in a city where we have issues of a lack of housing stock, the goal is to increase housing stock, housing units. And so how do you maximize the land to produce the more units? And the scheme that we came up with balances additional units and articulation on the site, and the client's other requests for amenities and other features.
Okay.
And Ms. Russell, maybe you know this, but I did ask Jeff Werner with the Board of Architectural Review about this house. It's the Harmon House, constructed in 1899. I haven't seen any interior of the photos, so I'm interested that you were able to find them.
Dropped it in the chat. Their website is gradhousing.com.
Ah, okay. It was fun to read the survey done in 1977, where the surveyor, who I don't know, his name wasn't there, but he put at the bottom of it that the current owner was very uncooperative. So there were no interior photos or no information of the inside of the house available. But it's certainly been compromised already by the buildings that have been constructed in its front yard and all around it. But it's not protected at all. It's not on the state, federal, or local historic districts or IPPs or anything. It is a shame that it couldn't be incorporated into the design. It's really interesting, but I couldn't find a leg to stand on to keep it.
I have a question on that topic. Would it be possible to preserve some elements of the structure being proposed to be lost and use it as an amenity in the new structure?
There you go, Ms. Hannigan. You can take the ionic columns and put it on the front of that corner that has the very lofting. I'm teasing.
Good. We had not considered that yet. I don't believe that the guidelines would suggest we plaster pieces and parts onto a building. So, but maybe there are other considerations that we can make as we further investigate that suggestion.
Thank you.
Look, I have no taste, but I think that's a great idea. My question is, you mentioned that the parking is below grade. Is it like totally 100% below grade? No walls on the outside will like have any parking, whether exposed or inside of them?
So at the lowest level, the same level as the entry lobby, the parking garage would come up to the front face of the building, but that's also on the side of the building where we are stepping up the terraces to engage the higher grades on the Observatory Avenue side. So it's basically, you know, a diagonal across the parking at the front is concealed, and we didn't think any of it should be exposed. I think 1725 put windows into the parking areas, which I'm not sure is that successful to activate the street. And so we preferred not to do that. So therefore we decided it shouldn't be visible from the public realm, and that we should conceal it all. There might, even as one turns the corner and goes up Observatory Avenue, there's parking behind part of the wall on that side. There would be an exit from the garage, a door from the stair and from the garage that come out to the street at the second level of parking. But again, we weren't intending to open any of that up as visible into it.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm not like recommending you have visible parking. What I was getting at is I would strongly recommend that you maximize the number of units in your whatever massing you end up with. And, you know, as part of an SUP, you can request a parking adjustment. And currently you have a bunch of units that would have 2 spaces per unit. And I would suggest that with students in particular, if they don't have somewhere to park, those cars kind of just evaporate. They just become car-free households, or you know, there's a group of roommates and they all share one car to go get groceries. And so I would encourage you to get as close to you know, the 1 space per unit level as you can, even within the existing parking minimums. I don't think there's any better place in the city where you could do that. You know, you probably will worry about whether you can get financing, but you would still be very heavily parked, and you would have more units generating revenue within, you know, any given massing you choose. So if you can explore that option, because there are some, you know, elements of the garage that would have the opportunity to face the street, or even have direct, you know, entrances onto the sidewalk, that I would recommend you go that route if possible, or explore it.
Understand, we'll look into it and discuss that with our client and see how they can entertain it.
Additional questions or comments?
Do you have any idea of the range that these new units will rent at?
No idea at this point. I think we would have to come back to you at, you know, in a future meeting with information like that.
Seems like you're gonna be catering towards a pretty high-end clientele, though. I mean, there's lots of amenities. I'm seeing these as pretty expensive.
They would be market rate, and they would be competing with, you know, other projects, not unlike the ones on West Main Street or the ones on Millmont Street, and so the offerings in terms of amenities and rents would reflect, you know, a competitive market to those other projects.
So this is definitely student population, right?
It will be targeting student population, although
And
it's not restricted to that.
the units per acre is like 70. How many apartments does that translate into?
It's 119 units.
In student population. Let's go.
Mr. Palmer?
Do you know what your FAR is?
No, we haven't calculated that yet.
Mr. Palmer, please.
Oh yeah, thanks. All good comments. I like what Roy was saying about the parking, you know, exploring, minimizing the parking. I mean, there's UTS, there's CAT goes through there. It's highly walkable. I think there's probably opportunities there. My one comment that I hadn't heard, that when I saw this project in the packet, kind of has to do with the JPA kind of sidewalk streetscape, and you mentioned the streets that work plan. And then when I look at your kind of streetscape for in front of the building along JPA. I'm not really seeing the congruency there. I mean, there's certain aspects of it. I guess my biggest comment would be, it seems like there's kind of a retaining wall against a very narrow sidewalk, that the sidewalk is, admittedly in the right of way. It's not your property. But if there was a way to kind of create a wider sidewalk or a barrier-free way through your site without stairs, that would probably be, to a huge benefit to the walking population and rolling and strolling population along JPA. That's all I got.
You have thoughts on that, Ms. Hannigan?
Good thoughts.
It's still an early concept, the streetscape is, so we can, we can further address that as we continue to design it. There's a big grade difference, obviously, in the overall site as well as across the front. It drops 10 feet from Observatory down to Washington. And so mitigating that and not having really tall retaining walls at the upper side of it is a challenge. And so trying to create these intermediate spaces as it steps from one side down to the other was the goal, so that it always felt like you were part of the street realm, like you weren't completely removed on a terrace 12 feet above the street. So we can continue to study that, though.
Mr. Bob?
I guess to that point, I agree. I think it might be worth studying. I think you did a good job in trying to, with the plantings and trying to have that kind of public realm with the possible commercial amenity spaces, but it could maybe be better and provide good accessible public space along that edge. I guess comments specific to the entrance review board. I think Commissioner Alejandro eloquently stated my concerns in fitting with the
not eloquently.
I know it's in the beginning process, but I think it could use a lot more detailing and getting it to be fitting to the character of the rest of the community. I don't think we see a lot of I don't know what the material is right now, I guess, in the background and the vertical white piece right now, but I'll be interested to see what you guys come up with. Overall, I mean, I appreciate the goal. That's kind of what we want. We want the density in the site, right where all the students are. One kind of tangential concern I think Commissioner Russell touched upon is the units that are going to go offline that are existing right now. And I know we can't control units, the building's getting demolished, but replacing those units right now with the high-end luxury units and what that does to the rent. And you might not have the numbers on you right now, but that's just a concern of mine, that we're taking out possibly more affordable units and putting back really expensive luxury units.
Mr. Lander?
So I am looking at the design. Oh, am I still there? Okay, good. Because I'm terrible with this stuff. I tried to put my hand down and there it goes. Okay, so I'm looking at the guidelines and there are they're very detailed. I really recommend Ms. Hannigan, the firm, take a close look at these. Just looking at the design principles in chapter 4 for buildings. The first one is design for corridor vision. The new building design should be compatible in massing, scale, materials, colors with those structures that contributed to the overall character and quality of the corridor. So remember that the corridor is coming, it starts at the bypass and comes down Fontaine and then onto JPA. into town. That's the entrance corridor component. So this should fit in with the character of those things that you're seeing along that corridor. And it also has for maintaining the human scale in buildings and spaces. Consider the building scale, especially height, mass, complexity of form, and architectural details, and the impact of spaces created as it will be experienced by the people who will pass by, live, work, or shop there. Size, placement, and number of doors, windows, portals, and openings define human scale, as does the degree of ground floor pedestrian access. So again, and the others are supporting that. I think please look through these. I think the way it is designed now along JPA is not completely respectful of the guidelines. And even along Observatory in Washington, despite what I said before, you still got to think about that being a pedestrian, mainly pedestrian walkways along those streets. You've got to do something to respond to the pedestrians, make them feel comfortable, and related to the structures that you're putting up. So that's as much as I can say right now.
Are there,
but the information is there, so please take a look at it.
Are there particular projects along JPA that you would reference as the structures that you want us to use as the context for the entrance corridor?
No.
None? There's some good ones.
Well, I'm thinking, when I say entrance corridor, I'm thinking between the bypass and along Fontaine to JPA, and they're all smaller buildings, but the fire station, I guess, is the largest thing along there, and that there you have a great choice of materials, because I think they've got one of everything on that building. Just think of it in context with that entrance corridor, and what you're.
So how does 1800 JPA factor into your thinking? Because so 106 feet, 9-story building.
Yeah, but there they do have a lower section that's more horizontal, and then an upper section. So it's designed very differently. It's designed with more horizontality involved, and they do try and break down that scale with it. Not that I'm a great fan of that building, but it at least responds to some of the guidelines.
Okay, cool. Because our friend Jen Keller was asking about how that works there. So yeah.
Personally, I'm sorry, Mr. Stolzenberg.
Yeah, so I think to maybe build off Commissioner Alejandro and Palmer's comments, well, first off, on like materials, I feel like if you're looking at the Kenilworth, like 1725 JPA, I do feel like that came off pretty good looking, and Charlottesville, in the sense of the cladding and the cornices. Again, I have no taste, and I'm a sucker for cornices, so maybe that's my own bias. I think the thing that's really bad about it is the 2 stories of parking garage above grade, and the fact that it's very removed from the street. But getting back to what Commissioner Palmer said, I feel like that retaining wall there, like it's taller than that guy's head that is walking by with a backpack. It's really a lot. And if you could bring that all down to street level, given the challenges that entails, I think that would be a big improvement, and just having a wider space to kind of walk, and a more permeable space to get into this like little cafe terrace area. I also feel like I like the whole thing you've done with the pulling back on that side in height, and in not having the tower there. I wonder if maybe it's been a little bit overdone, and to have 1 story that's granted like half a story above grade, might be too short, and that it would be maybe possible to do almost like your downtown mall, like kind of live work aesthetic, where you have your story of retail, and then you can still get a story or two above that to get to 2 or 3 stories, still very much human scale walking along the street, and with that more traditional aesthetic, and then help that kind of disguise the larger building in the back, especially from street level. I also kind of feel like it's a little bit, well, the thought of having a bunch of drunk college kids in the pool 1 story above me walking on the sidewalk feels a little weird. I feel like if they're 3 stories up, they're like separated from me. But you know, at 1 story up, I feel like it's a little odd. I'll just toss that out there.
Mr. Habab, please.
I guess I also, yeah, regarding the parking, I think it's good that it's hidden. I think that was, you know, that's what we want. We don't want to see the parking lot off of the street, and hopefully the side streets as best as we can. I'm interested in how the development interacts with the houses and the residences on the side streets. I don't know if you can elaborate that now. In addition to that, I'd also like to see some maybe street elevation diagrams to show the scale of the building in context with the you know, the side streets and the JPA, just for reference whenever this comes back to us. I feel like that'd be helpful for me at least. One thing that Mayor, I don't know, I guess if other commissioners agree, that might be interesting is to see the kind of the shadow that this would cast on neighboring properties, just out of curiosity. That I know that came up in different projects before. And I think that's what I have for now until I think of something else.
I have a couple of buildings I'd like to point out. 1707 JPA, Fry Spring Station, and 1800 JPA. I'm also looking at that. Those jump to me. I'd like to return to the questions. Question number 1 was, is a DOA of 70 at this location appropriate? I'd like to propose that we do a round robin on that question. Does that seem fair?
Yep.
Mr. Mitchell, DOA 70 dwelling units per acre.
Yeah.
That seems reasonable. Mr. Bob, 70
Yes,
DOA.
70 or more, yeah.
Mr. Alejandro, 70.
Yes, yes.
Ms. Russell, 70.
Yeah, I don't really care.
Mr. Stolzenberg, 70.
Too low. Pack the students in. Keep them from falling out. Higher. Make it higher.
Mr. Palmer, do you have thoughts on 70?
There would be yes.
No, I don't have an opinion on the dwelling units an acre. I mean, that's dwelling units and not beds. So there's probably a lot of, you know, ways of getting that to be what you kind of want it to be.
And I concur. I think 70 makes perfect sense for this site. And I could see value in more also. Second question, is a height of 75 feet appropriate for this location? Mr. Mitchell, 75 feet.
I'm going to defer to Mr. Henry.
Howard. Mr. Habab.
No, just smart.
I guess specifically on this question without deviating, yes, say yes.
Mr. Alejandro.
I think it is in certain places on the site and not on other places on the site, not necessarily on JPA.
And so my point is, I'm not smart enough to know that, and he did. So that's why I defer to him.
Thank you. Ms. Russell.
Yeah, my concern is not so much on JPA, but how it affects the ancillary side. So I don't know if I can, I'm with Jody.
Mr. Stolzenberg, height.
I think it's good. I think it needs to be designed well, especially along the street front on JPA. I would lean towards not worrying too much about Washington and Observatory. You know, design it well, sure, but like anecdotally, since I seem to be full of these weird personal connections to places right next to places, I knew the guys who lived in 113 Washington for like at least 2 years and hung out there all the time. I know they would not have cared if you built 75 across the street. And I appreciate how, just given the grade change, the actual height at the back is lower.
Mr. Palmer, height.
I don't have any comment on the height.
Thank you. Personally, 75 seems fine to me. I think good design can make it great. I think bad design can make it bad. Please don't be bad. Next question. Is the rear setback appropriate to protect the existing R2U district? Mr. Mitchell, rear setbacks.
Yeah, I'm cool with
it. Switching. Mr. Habab, rear setbacks.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Mr. Alejandro, rear setbacks.
Yeah, I'm fine with it being no more than 5 stories tall on that backside. Yes, 2 stories in the ground.
Ms. Russell, back.
Yeah, I appreciated the diagram that the applicant provided that had that diagonal line. That was helpful.
Mr. Stolzenberg.
Yeah, I also appreciated the use of the West Main Street, like bulk plane thing. I think that was clever and makes sense, and it's much more logical than our regular R3 stuff. I also appreciate the S3 buffer and really the trees all over. I appreciate that you're showing that you can still have lots of trees and high density.
Mr. Palmer, the rear.
Yeah, my only thought on that was that buffer is great. And as long as if there is like requirement for emergency vehicle type access behind the building, as long as, you know, with the buffer and the 11 feet, if that's enough, that's great. But if it needs to be a little wider, that might be necessary, but I don't know. I don't know the engineering there. But just that it doesn't impact the buffer, you know.
And I like it, and I think the trees are great. And last question about the entrance corridor review, the bonus question. Mr. Mitchell, does it meet the characteristics of the corridor?
I'm going to let Jody tell me what I think.
Mr. Habab, corridor review. We won't hold you to this.
Yeah. I think they just need, as I think they might agree, just need to elaborate the design a little more for me to comment on it. I think some of Jody's concerns make sense to me.
Mr. Alejandro.
I don't see that it complies with the entrance corridor guidelines as of yet, especially along JPA.
And so to that, do you mean that we need to move the building back a little bit? The building.
We need to reduce the apparent height. We need to.
Got it.
Yeah. Reduce the apparent height and bring more compatible. Make the materials at least at the pedestrian level, at the street level, more compatible with Charlottesville materials.
And just to clarify, that doesn't mean necessarily pushing that corner, that's the towering corner back. It just means creative use of materials along that corner. Possibly.
Yes. Emphasizing the horizontal instead of vertical.
Got it. I agree with the architects. Again, I'm not an architect, and I think Mr. Bob and Mr. Lindrup have nailed it for me.
Ms. Russell, aesthetics, please.
Yeah, I agree that this does not pass muster with our current, our existing design guidelines for the entrance corridors and needs some work.
Mr. Stolzenberg.
I think the massing itself is appropriate if we can fix that JPA streetscape and really make it responsive to the sidewalk and the low part. And the materials, I mean, again, I have no taste, but I think that sort of material and cladding is kind of ugly, but I'm not one to judge. I mean, I would go look at the Wells Fargo building, which is, you know, a couple stories taller than this, and look at how it has, you know, the first two tall stories looking completely different with the cornice line. And then there's all that extra stuff on top that almost seems not noticeable. But all the architects are going to laugh at my stupid aesthetic opinions. So maybe take them with a grain of salt.
Thank you,
And use
Mr.
the
Palmer.
column. Reuse-
Mr. Palmer, aesthetics, please.
Aesthetics. Well, I think I'll go back to my comment more about the streetscape and how that, how a, not necessarily a car, but a pedestrian or biker would kind of interact with and view the site, the building. Beyond that, yeah, I think Jody's probably right. It probably, needs a little more work to, hide the apparent massing. Those types of things are always beneficial. I don't know if step backs are in play here above a certain height, but that might be another strategy. But I don't know they do it on West Main, but that's usually associated with a lower setback. So that always gets confusing, the setback versus step back conversation.
Yeah.
So.
Ziggurats everywhere. Personally, what I see seems reasonable. It obviously needs a little bit more baking. I agree with the pedestrian-oriented concerns, and that's a benefit for the people who live there as well, it being sort of the quality aesthetic experience from the street. It's a strange quarter because it's changing. We're a lot of buildings that are there that are smaller are going to go away, as we'll likely see here. And the bigger buildings will have a long aesthetic impact. They're going to have a long life and a long sort of part of the story of the corridor. So it makes it challenging for aesthetic regulation, but I think that's helpful to keep in mind what the landmarks are going to be through time.
Thank
Additional
you.
comments, questions?
Thank you for running through that so quickly. One question is, which Wells Fargo building are you referencing?
Downtown Mall, I think.
Downtown.
Downtown?
Reddit.
Okay.
It's great.
I mean, again, I don't know that you should be taking my aesthetic opinions, but it's a great looking building. Court Square has the same kind of dynamic going on. I mean, I do wonder about this sort of design by committee kind of thing we're kind of doing, and the idea of like trying to make new things look like old things. And again, I really don't think anyone should care about my aesthetic opinions, and it's wild to me that I even have a vote in any aesthetic things, but you're right.
And please do not take anything I said to mean that I wanted to have it look old. No, I appreciate modern design. I like good modern design. Just asking you to pick up some cues from the existing architecture there in the corridor.
Understood. Thank you.
And Jody likes 515 rugby, so sometimes I wonder about his aesthetic opinions too.
You're not the only one.
Any closing comments or questions before we wrap here?
I guess I think this was a comment by Commissioner Russell before of the existing spaces that the homes create on site right now. It's kind of quirky, adds to the fabric of the neighborhood, what Charlottesville is. So I don't know if there's a way to incorporate just that kind of feeling with Mr. Palmer's comments on that engagement with JPA on the sidewalk, but something to maybe study.
Yeah.
I would entertain a motion at this time.
I move that we adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All four? Thumbs up, please. I'll take it. I believe we are adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Hannigan.
Thanks.
Well-run meeting.
Thank
dude.
you.